Chapter 32:10. Burp. It sounded like a small bubble bursting. Yo-Yo and Xiao Ichen were amused. Oh my, how could little sister be so cute? They couldn't bear to part with her. Yo-Yo wanted to hug her, but the sun was getting brighter. Yun Shusha was worried that Yuyaro would get sunburned, so she urged, "Put Yuyaro in the stroller to sleep." Mu Yaja was reluctant to let her go, but the sun was indeed getting brighter. He reluctantly put the little guy in the stroller and pushed it towards the next attraction. "Mommy, do you still remember?" As they passed by Happiness Street, Yo-Yo looked at the game stall and said excitedly, "You won a toy for me here before." Yun Shusha saw this and thought of something. She giggled and said, "I remember. You said you wanted to play before, but you couldn't make many shot." Yo-Yo's face instantly turned red. He said indignantly, "That's because I wasn't in shape. Now that I'm playing shooting games, I'll definitely improve." With that, he pulled little Ichen over to the hoop machine. After flashing his VIP card, he took the ball from the hoop and started throwing it indignantly. Yun Shusha and Mu Yaja walked over and stood outside the crowd to watch. Yo-Yo tried his best to shoot the ball. His face was red from holding back, but it wasn't that he didn't improve. However, in the past, he could only make one shot. Now, he could make two. Such a small improvement wasn't worth mentioning. After only half a minute, his stamina couldn't keep up. His accuracy dropped again. In the end, he only managed to score more than 500 points and won a commemorative prize. Yo-Yo left the basketball machine dejectedly. Xiao Ichen walked up to him and said, "Yo-Yo, Big Brother will win a prize for you." He showed his VIP card as well. Soon, the time started. He grabbed the basketball, his eyes burning with a fierce fire. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. He threw 10 consecutive shots and hit the target every time. Xiao Ichen had great stamina. Furthermore, he was much better at sports than Yo-Yo. Therefore, he was naturally gifted at sports like basketball and soccer. He rarely played basketball, and he didn't shoot much either, but his accuracy was surprisingly high. By the time the game ended, he had obtained more than 1,000 points and could get a second prize. Second prize. This prize was already very generous. It was a rare toy from Laji, and Xiao Ichen successfully won it. It was a cute and lifelike little tiger with snow-white fur and emerald-like eyes. It was extremely realistic. Xiao Ichen thought it was just a simple plush toy. When he received the toy, he muttered, "So this is the second prize? It looks very ordinary." "Of course not." Yo-Yo scoffed and took the toy from his hand. Then, he gently pinched its left paw. With a beep, it entered recording mode. It turned out that this plush toy wasn't an ordinary tiger plush toy. It also had a recording function. Yo-Yo said to the tiger's little mouth, "Little Yuyaro is the most beautiful princess in the world." Chapter 32:11. Wow. You can play like that. If you press the left paw, the previous recording will be replaced. Little Ichen could not bear to let go of the cub as he smiled from ear to ear. "This is so fun. Did you design this as well?" "Sort of." "What do you mean sort of?" "Not all the toys were designed by me, but the designs were all approved by me." Yo-Yo said proudly, "Do you know why Lajiwei beat those old toy companies and became the world's #1 toy company?" Xiao Ichen was puzzled. "Why?" "That's because most of the toys designed by adults are perfunctory. Only those who are truly childlike can design toys that all the children in the world like." Yo-Yo continued, "Only the children can understand what kind of toys they want." When they passed by the shooting range, Yo-Yo suddenly recalled the first time they were at Fairy Tale Valley. Xiao Ichen had hugged a giant panda and stood in line at the entrance of the haunted house. At that time, he was surprised that someone had won the first prize in a shooting game. Later, when he found out that Xiao Ichen had won, he was even more surprised. Why was this guy so good at all kinds of games? "Xiao Ichen, your shooting skills are so good. Go and win a special prize." Xiao Ichen said, "My shooting skills are not even half of Daddy's." Then, Xiao Ichen said to Mu Yaja coquettishly, "Daddy, go and play that shooting game and win a special prize for Yo-Yo." Mu Yaja said, "No." "Why? It's such a childish game." Yo-Yo snorted and said mockingly, Daddy is afraid that he won't be able to play well and will lose face. That's why he didn't dare to accept the challenge. Yoon Shusha laughed in her heart. This method of provocation probably wouldn't work on a certain man. However, the outcome was unexpected. A certain man snorted coldly, stood up, and said, "Are you looking down on your daddy's standards? Then daddy can only use his strength to slap his face." Yoon Shusha was confused. "I'll go." Who was the more childish one? Can't you hear such obvious provocation? Mu Yaja walked to the front of the adult design table, showed his VIP card, and said to the staff, "Give me a gun." His appearance attracted the attention of countless people. This man was always so dazzling when he appeared in the crowd. So much so that when he appeared, the surrounding crowd suddenly quietened down. Their gazes fell on this tall and handsome man, sizing him up. Even the staff member couldn't help but become infatuated. After staring blankly for a long time, she blushed and handed the heavy gun to him. Mu Yaja raised his gun, and the countdown began. He aimed at the bullseye and pulled the trigger. The bullet immediately cut through the air and shot out. Although the speed was slow, his aim was accurate. He aimed at the most inflated part of the balloon. He knew very well which part of the balloon was the weakest. Therefore, every bullet that was shot out would be accompanied by the sound of an explosion. The balloon burst. Bang, bang, bang. A few rounds of bullets were fired. None of them missed. Gasps could be heard coming from the surrounding crowd. Chapter 32:12. While everyone was still in shock, Mu Yaja focused on raising the gun. He loaded the gun skillfully and pulled the trigger again. Bang, bang, bang. Along with the sound of balloons bursting, the scoreboard fell to the ground one after another. The crowd was in a heated discussion. This man's marksmanship is amazing. It doesn't look like it's his first time using a gun. Could he be a shooter? Judging from his aura, he seems to be from a military academy. When the last bullet was used, there were still a few seconds left. Mu Yaja put down the gun. The staff member was still in a daze and did not react for a long time. It was only when the time was up that she snapped back to her senses. The man reminded her expressionlessly, "It's time to calculate the point." Oh. The staff member collected the scoreboard and calculated the total points. There were more than 800 points. Xiao Chen was also shocked. He walked over to take a look and saw that there were a few 50 points. Daddy's luck was so good. When he first started playing this game, he only had about 300 points. Daddy's points actually broke the record that he had kept until now. More than 800 points. This was really unprecedented. In the future, Daddy could only break the record on the shooting range for fun. Mu Yaja was not surprised by this result. In fact, it was a good result that he had expected. The staff member smiled and said, "Sir, you have a total of more than 800 points. You can choose any of the prizes on the shooting range, including the special prizes in the area." At this moment, little Yuyaro woke up. Yoon Shusha carried Yuyaro in her arms. The little girl rubbed her sleepy eyes and blinked gently. When Xiao Chen saw that his little sister had woken up, he said to Yo-Yo, "Why don't you pick a toy that little sister likes?" When everyone saw this, they could not help but gasp in amazement. This little girl is so cute. Look at her eyes. They are so beautiful. It's no wonder that this little girl is so beautiful. She doesn't even know what kind of genes her parents have. One is handsome and the other is beautiful and gentle. This girl is also a natural beauty. When she grows up, she will definitely be a super beauty. That's great. Now I want to have a daughter too. However, Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen started discussing nervously. My little sister likes dolls. Why don't we get the first prize for the SD doll? But the grand prize is a 1-meter-long giraffe. Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen ran to the prize area. They each picked up an SD doll and a giraffe and walked over to Yuyaro for her to choose. "Sister, what kind of toys do you like?" Yoon Shusha hugged Yuyaro and asked gently, "Yuyaro, your two brothers are asking you what toys do you like." Everyone's gaze fell on little Yuyaro. They were curious to see how this adorable little girl would react. Little Yuyaro first looked at the SD doll that Yo-Yo was holding up high. Her big eyes lit up and she immediately reached out to grab it. She seemed to like it very much. Ya. She could not speak yet, so she could only babble incoherently. However, from her expression, it seemed that she really liked this doll. Shusha was curious when she saw this. Yuyaro seems to like the SD doll more. When Yo-Yo saw that she liked it, he quickly pushed the SD doll into her arms. Chapter 32:13. When Xiao-Chen saw this, he reluctantly hugged the giraffe and squeezed in front of Yo-Yo again. He said to Yuyaro, little sister, don't you like this doll? It's a giraffe. When you grow up, you can hug it to sleep." When the people around them saw this, their hearts were warmed by this loving scene. These two little brothers must be twins, right? They were so nice to their little sister. It was obvious that these two little guys doted on their little sister a lot. Some of the moms were envious and amused at the same time. Many families would fight over a toy when they had a second child. They were afraid that one of them would be favored and the other would be neglected and ostracized. Sometimes, bickering was unavoidable. Hence, a harmonious relationship between children was extremely rare and precious. When Yuyaro saw the giraffe in Xiao-Chen's arms, she instinctively reached out to grab it. To her, there were so many interesting, fun, and novel things in this world. She would find anything that she had never seen before interesting. However, she was still so young and didn't know how to choose. She only knew that she wanted whatever was given to her. When Yo-Yo saw this, she immediately shouted, "Muo-chen, don't go back on your word. Little sister obviously likes the SD doll more." "Says who? You're the one who's going back on your word. If you didn't want to put the SD doll in front of little sister so badly that she can't see the toy in my arms, she wouldn't want your doll. What do you know? All girls like dolls. Especially the SD doll. It's exquisite and realistic. Little sister will love it so much that she won't be able to put it down. The giraffe is still the cutest. Little sister will definitely like the present I choose." The two little guys, one holding the SD doll and the other hugging the giraffe, were arguing about whose present their little sister would like more. The surrounding people burst into good-natured laughter. Mu Yaja's lips twitched. He walked over and said, "Why are you arguing again? Daddy, Yo-Yo is being shameless." "You're the one who's being shameless. I don't care. Anyway, little sister wants an SD doll first." Shusha didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She asked Yuyaro, which brother picked your favorite toy? Yuyaro looked at the SD doll in Yo-Yo's hands and then looked at the giraffe in Xiao-Chen's arms. For a moment, he was in a dilemma. She then looked at the two little lads who were looking at her with eager eyes. She was so nervous that she held her breath. It was as if this wasn't a toy selection, but a sacred election. In his heart, he was shouting, "Sister, choose me, choose me." Yuyaro suddenly stretched out both of his hands. One of his hands reached for the doll in Yo-Yo's arms, while the other hand reached for the giraffe in Xiao-Chen's arms. Shusha explained, "It's broken. Your little sister is greedy. She wants both." Muyaja held his forehead and said, "Stop arguing. Since Yuyaro likes both, then she wants both." He went back to the shooting range and said to the staff, "I'll play again." Again. Chapter 32:14. Muyaja looked to the side and saw two staff members holding balloons, perspiring profusely. They were blowing them with their cheeks puffed up. They looked at him pleadingly. The staff member immediately tried to smooth things over. "Sir, your shooting skills are obvious to all. Why don't we give you both toys? After all, you've earned more than 800 points." When they left Fairy Tale Valley, Muyaja pushed a pram with a gigantic giraffe plushie on top of it. Her adorable expression attracted the attention of countless people. Little Yuyaro lay in the pram, hugging the SD plushie in her arms. Occasionally, she would grab her hair and occasionally play with her limbs. She was overjoyed. Xiao-Chen and Yo-Yo were like two guardian deities guarding the pram as they walked towards the parking lot. Shusha walked at the back. Looking at this scene, she felt as though her heart was filled with something. Sometimes, happiness was just a momentary perception. In a certain frame, her heart was filled with happiness. At this moment, She suddenly felt that everything in her life, everything she had now, there was nothing else she could ask for. In the past, when she was still a young girl, her biggest wish was to meet a man she truly loved and walk into the sacred hall of marriage with him. However, at this moment, she suddenly felt that a grand wedding wasn't that important anymore. Dullness was true. These words were not false. Although life after marriage was peaceful, every day when she hugged him to sleep, she could see his sleeping face when she woke up. She had 2 adorable sons and an adorable daughter. In this life, God treated her well. Everything that she had was not easy to come by, so she knew to cherish it even more. Mu Yaja pushed the pram and suddenly realized that there was an empty space beside him. He stopped in his tracks and turned around. He saw Yun Shusha walking slowly behind him. He smiled and extended his hand to her. "Shusha, hold my hand." Yun Shusha was stunned. Looking at his outstretched hand, she smiled sweetly and extended her hand to him. He held it fast at once. She caught up to him and heard him say, "There are so many people. Don't get lost." She took his arm and smiled at him. Yes. When the family of 5 returned home, they were met with Zhong Wansan's family, who was waiting at the door. They went to Fairy Tale Valley to play, and the Zhong family really waited at their door for an entire day. Seeing that Mu Yaja had returned, Zhong Wansan immediately came up to him and personally apologized to him. He didn't want him to lose his job because of such a small matter. On the other hand, the woman at the side secretly shed tears. She seemed to realize the seriousness of the matter and knew that she had offended a big shot. It was too late for regrets. Holding her son's hand, the woman and the child bowed and apologized repeatedly. "Chairman Mu, we know we were wrong. We have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please forgive us." The little guy was really frightened. He kept bowing and apologizing. His childish voice was trembling. The arrogance and domineering attitude he had when he bullied Yo-Yo was gone. Instead, he was crying helplessly and rubbing his tears. He was extremely sad. It was probably because Zhong Wansan had taught him a lesson yesterday that he knew he was in the wrong. Mu Yaja was hard-hearted and naturally ignored him. Xiao Chen and Yo-Yo also wanted to enter the house without looking back. Chapter 32:15. The little boy was stunned. He raised his head and looked at the gentle woman in front of him in astonishment. When the child's mother saw this, she had mixed feelings. Thank you, Mrs. Mu. Mommy, why are you paying attention to them?" Yo-Yo said unhappily. "Don't bother about them." Yun Shusha said to them, "You can go back." But Zhong Wansan still looked at Mu Yaja hesitantly, as if he wanted to say something. Yun Shusha seemed to know what was on his mind. She said calmly, "There's a saying that goes, a close neighbor is better than a distant relative. This matter is over. I just hope that you will discipline your son well in the future. Children can't be spoiled. They'll be spoiled. Yes. I'll definitely discipline my son well. In the future, I won't let him be so unreasonable and bully other children." Zhong Wansan left with his wife and son. Yo-Yo looked at their backs as they left. He said unhappily, "Mommy, why are you so gentle to them?" Yun Shusha suddenly squatted down in front of him and said calmly, "Yo-Yo, do you know? Leaving some leeway for others is also leaving some leeway for yourself." Yo-Yo seemed to understand. Ever since the incident with Yun Na, Jiu Xing's death, and when she regained her sight and could see the world clearly, Yun Shusha's state of mind had changed greatly. She started to believe in karma. She believed that a good cause would lead to a good outcome. She believed that one should be forgiving whenever possible. Sometimes, there's no need to force people into a dead end. It's not like there's a deep hatred. Sometimes, if you force someone into a dead end, who knows what kind of revenge that person will take out of hatred in their despair. Yo-Yo, do you know? Mommy believes in karma now. I only think about how to conduct myself in the world and how to be peaceful. I also hope that what Mommy does can accumulate some karma for all of you. Mommy, don't be afraid. Daddy and Yo-Yo will protect you. However, Yun Shusha said, compared to being protected by Yo-Yo, Mommy really wants to protect you and not let anyone hurt you. When a person is in despair, they will develop great hatred because of a single mistake. In the midst of hatred, people would often lose their rationality. In other words, if Jong Won-san really lost his job because of this matter and fell to the bottom of the valley, who knew how ruthless they would be and how they would deal with them? She didn't want anyone to ruin this peaceful happiness. However, according to Mu Yaja's character, even if he didn't make Jong Won-san lose his job, it was inevitable that he would be demoted a few levels. However, Jong Won-san was already extremely grateful for this kind of treatment. From then on, the Jong family became much more well-behaved. Sometimes, when they bumped into each other on the road, they would nod politely and greet each other. Of course, this was all in the future. The date of the wedding has been set. When Gong Jie received the notice and learned that the wedding would be held in a month's time, he was filled with mixed feelings. He made a trip to Hurricane's headquarters but did not return to the Gong family immediately. Instead, he went to take a look at Yoon Yecheng, wanting to tell him the good news as soon as possible. Yoon Yecheng had been transferred to a ward. His body had yet to fully recover and was still waiting for surgery. However, he had already undergone a few skin grafts, and his face had basically recovered. It was just that it was difficult for such a recovery to be exactly the same as before the disfigurement. Chapter 32:16. Gene regeneration was a huge project. Alice told Gong Jie that it would take more than 30 surgeries to reconstruct his basic functions if he were to fully recover. Of course, the recovery she was referring to was only in a certain sense. For example, the recovery of vocal cords and the functions of other organs. When Gong Jie entered the ward, Yoon Yecheng was lying on the bed with an oxygen tube inserted. His eyes were open and he seemed to be awake. The electrocardiogram showed that everything was normal. He walked to the bed, bent down, and called out to Yoon Yecheng, "Uncle?" Yoon Yecheng turned his head slightly and glanced at him. With much difficulty, he said in a hoarse voice, "Shou Jie, you're back." Gong Jie sat down by the bed and took out his phone. He found the wedding post and a few wedding photos that Yoon Shusha had taken for him. He passed them to him and flipped through them for him to see. At the same time, he said softly to him, "Shusha is getting married soon. Before that, work hard to recuperate. I'll bring you to the wedding venue." Upon hearing this, Yoon Yecheng's lifeless eyes opened wide at once. His gaze brightened a little. Shusha is finally getting married. When little Yuyara was born, he was still in a coma after the surgery because of his condition. He could not rush over personally. When he woke up again, he found out from Gong Jie that Yoon Shusha had given birth to another daughter. He felt rather gratified that they had made a good son. However, at the same time, he could not help but feel regretful. He could not be by his side when his beloved daughter was giving birth. He even had to see his granddaughter through photos. In the photos, there was a family of 5. Mu Yaja sat by the bed and hugged Yoon Shusha in his arms. Yoon Shusha was holding little Yuyaro and facing the camera. Xiao Chen and Yo-Yo were smiling at the camera and making victory gestures. It was warm and beautiful. When he saw it, he felt incomparably gratified. However, when he heard Gong Jie say that he would be bringing him to the wedding venue, he was suddenly put in a spot. If Shusha is getting married, I won't go. When Gong Jie heard this, he was extremely surprised. Why? Shou Jie, look at me. There are so many VIPs at the wedding. I'm afraid my appearance will scare them off. Uncle, how can you think like that? Gong Jie comforted him. If you don't go, Shusha will be sad again. She would definitely want you to be a witness for such an important occasion. Hearing this, Yoon Yecheng felt touched and sad at the same time. He blinked and tears welled up in his eyes. He still felt that he had let her down. Because of Yoon Na, he had always been brooding over it. Gong Jie comforted him again. He said, "You're Shusha's father. You're her most important relative." When Yoon Yecheng heard this, tears welled up in his eyes again. Only then did he nod and agree to go. However, when Gong Jie left the ward, he recalled what he had just said and was momentarily stunned. "You're Shusha's father. You're her most important relative. Then, what about her father?" Gong Jie returned to the Gong residence absent-mindedly. Just as he walked upstairs, the butler saw him and immediately stopped him. "Young master, old master is waiting for you in the study. Father is looking for me." Chapter 32:17. Gong Jie hesitated for a moment before he turned and went to the study. In the study, Gong Xiaoying was sitting at the table with a photo in his hand. His gaze fell on the photo, and it was dark and inexplicable. When he heard a knock on the door, he looked up and casually placed the photo into a stack of documents. "Come in." Gong Jie pushed the door open and walked in. He looked at him and said respectfully, "Father, you were looking for me?" When Gong Xiaoying saw that it was him, he slowly stood up and walked in front of him, sizing him up. "Kid, you seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth some time ago. I don't know where you went to fool around again." When Gong Jie heard this, he felt extremely guilty, but he pretended to be calm and explained, "I went to Africa some time ago to follow a batch of orders." "Africa?" Gong Xiaoying smirked coldly and said in a low voice, "I've checked your whereabouts. You've been in Z country some time ago." Gong Jie was speechless. He secretly suspected that his father had sent someone to follow him or had deliberately investigated his whereabouts. However, Gong Xiaoying said, "Why? Are you hiding something from me?" Gong Jie said, "No. No." Gong Xiaoying probed, "You've been going to Z country. Don't tell me that you've kept a little pet there and can't bear to come back." Gong Jie knew that the little pet Gong Xiaoying was referring to was a woman. He said, "Father, you didn't send someone to follow me, did you?" "No, I didn't. I just saw that you were always distracted, so I was just asking." However, Gong Xiaoying did not expose him. The father and son looked at each other for a long time. In their eyes, they were sizing each other up and probing each other. Gong Xiaoying had summoned him to get some information from him. However, this kid had sealed his mouth tightly and did not say a word. He knew that he would not be able to get any information from him. Hence, he said, "Go back. I have nothing else to ask you." Gong Jie wondered if his father had sent someone to investigate his whereabouts, or if his father had followed his trail and found out about Yun Shusha. However, it wasn't appropriate for him to directly ask about these doubts. If it wasn't true, it would be like him confessing without being pressed. Or perhaps, his father was just testing him. He didn't know about Yun Shusha at all. Thinking of this, he had mixed feelings, but he didn't say anything and left the room. Gong Xiaoying saw the door close and returned to the desk with a complicated expression. He took out the photo from the pile of documents. This was a photo taken by Yun Shusha for a fashion magazine. He sent someone to investigate Yun Shusha's whereabouts. Among the information brought back by his subordinates, there were a series of photos and posters of her. He only kept this one because it had Mu Qingqing's shadow in it. Based on this photo alone, he was certain that the woman in the photo was his daughter. He had always thought that his daughter was no longer in this world. Mu Qingqing had given birth to a pair of twins for him. However, he had always thought that this daughter had unfortunately died. He didn't expect that she was still alive. Yun Shusha, that was his daughter's name. Chapter 32:18. On the eve of the wedding, there was a lot of preparation work. Mu Yaja started preparing a month in advance to avoid being flustered due to the lack of time. The wedding invitations had been sent out one after another. This time, the invitations were personally designed by Yun Shusha. After her confinement, she did not make a comeback immediately. When she was at home, she would read some reference books and think about the setting and invitations for the wedding. In order to be able to participate as much as she could, she learned some graphic design. The design of the invitation was very special. With a red background, a gold inlaid border, and a hollowed-out rose, it was a combination of Chinese and Western, adding to the festive atmosphere. After the invitations were sent out, they had to start preparing the details of the wedding. For example, the bridesmaids and groomsmen. Yo-Yo suggested forming a group of sisters, but Yun Shusha did not have many close friends. Those who had been married before could not be the bridesmaids. Hence, the bridesmaids were decided to be Xiao Shui, Mu Shi, and Jun Mo. When Jun Mo heard that Yun Shusha wanted to invite her to be the bridesmaid of the wedding, she was surprised and happy. She joked that she played the second male lead, Su Qi, in the movie The Green Apple. Now, she was finally going to personally send her lover into the wedding hall. However, she was a little worried that she would not be able to pull off a dress. Jun Mo had always been dressed in a more neutral outfit. In addition, Yoon Shusha's wedding was a Chinese wedding. Hence, she was quite worried. However, the wedding planner said that if short-haired people would look out of place in traditional Chinese clothing, they could provide wigs. When Yoon Shusha heard this, she immediately dragged the 3 bridesmaids to try on the makeup. After trying it on, she realized that Jun Mo looked very good in women's clothes. After all, her facial features were there. A good-looking person would look good in anything. Jun Mo felt a little awkward at first, but Yoon Shusha repeatedly emphasized that this was the only wedding and they had to give face. Jun Mo could only bite the bullet and agree. There was no need to worry about the groomsmen. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun were the best candidates. Mu Yaja also invited Qin Ju to be the groomsman. Such a joyous occasion, Qin Ju was naturally happy. The bridesmaids and groomsmen were finally decided. When they came back in the evening, Yoon Shusha showed Mu Yaja the photos of the bridesmaids trying on their makeup. Mu Yaja especially noticed Jun Mo's appearance. He recognized Jun Mo as the second male lead in the movie at a glance and felt that it was a little unbelievable. Who is she? Wasn't he playing the second male lead? Yoon Shusha said reproachfully, have you forgotten? I've introduced her to you before. Her name is Jun Mo. She's a real girl. She was a musician and liked to dress in a neutral manner. Her fans had always called her Adonis or Adonis. She had suffered a little because of my wedding. It was said that this was the first time she had worn a dress since she was young. You've made me feel flattered. Mu Yaja held back his laughter and nodded. It's very beautiful. He asked again, have the invitations been sent out? Actually, the VIP list for the wedding had been prepared long ago. Many of the invitations had been written long ago. However, there was an invitation that would never reach that person's hand. Chapter 32:19. This invitation card probably wouldn't be sent to him. However, she did not know why she had written his name on the invitation. When she came back to her senses, she realized that this invitation would not be sent to the other side of the world. She did not know if there would really be a heaven in this world like the legends said. She had seen a movie called The Postman of Heaven. The plot was about the male lead who was once an elite in the IT industry. He had a successful career and a flamboyant personality. However, due to an accident, he became a vegetable. God gave him 2 more weeks of life as a condition for him to be the postman of heaven. He would deliver letters between heaven and the human world, bringing hope to those who had lost their loved ones. She did not know if this invitation could be sent to heaven. If Jiyu Xingze was really in heaven, would he wish her happiness too? Thinking of this name, the rims of her eyes turned slightly sour again. In the past, she did not dare to hope too much for happiness, because once she became happy, she felt uneasy at the thought that this happiness was built on Jiyu Xingze sacrificing his life to protect her. It was too selfish of her. However, Qin Ju said that Jiyu Xingze risked his life to protect her only because he hoped that she could be the continuation of his life. She could replace him and enjoy the joys and sorrows of life. She gradually got rid of the trauma. Xingze, are you okay? Yoon Shusha smiled and mumbled as she slowly closed the invitation. Mu Yaja pushed open the door of the study and walked in. He saw her sitting alone at the table, pressing an invitation to her chest. She looked a little lonely. He walked over and gently put his arm around her shoulders. Looking at the invitation in her hand, he knew whose name was written on this invitation. He asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking if this invitation can be sent to him." Mu Yaja could not help but laugh and burst her fantasy. Heaven does not exist in this world. When people die, they will not come back to life, and they will not become angels. The disappointment on Yoon Shusha's face became more obvious. She also knew that her extravagant hope did not exist. It was just her wishful thinking. He slowly squatted down in front of her, held her hand, and said solemnly, "That's why, in my limited life, I'll cherish you." He reached out his hand and pinched her cheek gently. "My dear wife, you're about to get married. Don't think about those unpleasant memories anymore. People will inevitably have regrets in their lives, but these regrets cannot be brushed aside for the rest of their lives." "Yes." Yoon Shusha put the invitation card back into the drawer and hugged him gently. The preparations for the wedding proceeded in an orderly manner. There was still a week before the wedding, so Gong Jie brought Yun Yeqing back to the country in advance. When Yun Yeqing got off the plane, he saw Yun Shusha carrying the pink Yuyaro at the arrival gate. Mu Yaja, Yo-Yo, and Xiaoichen were all there. The corners of Yun Yeqing's lips twitched. He could not hold back his tears and they welled up. The father and daughter reunited again and were filled with emotions. Yun Yeqing felt extremely guilty and regretful toward her. During the darkest period of her life, he was not by her side to protect her. She was pregnant for 10 months, gave birth, and went through her confinement period after giving birth. He regretted that he was not by her side. Chapter 32:20. There was an indescribable sense of guilt in his heart. Yun Shusha, on the other hand, was very surprised by Yun Yeqing's recovery. Ever since he was sent to the Gong family, they had been in contact through video calls. From the video, she could tell that Yun Yeqing was recovering very quickly, but she did not expect him to recover 50% of his looks. At least, after skin grafting, some of his functional organs were no longer a problem. Although his looks could not be said to have recovered completely, after some adjustments, it had already exceeded her expectations. What was even more surprising was that he could already speak fluently. After a few vocal cord surgeries, he could already express himself clearly in words. Yun Shusha was pleasantly surprised. She hugged Gong Jie and was so excited that she could not speak. Gong Jie smiled. "Sister, I promised you that I'll do my best. Since I've said that, I naturally have to fulfill my promise." Yun Shusha said sincerely to him, "Thank you, Shou Jie. Don't you think it's too polite to say thank you?" Gong Jie had returned to the country to prepare for her wedding. Originally, Mu Yaja had invited the media to cover the entire wedding, but Yun Shusha requested not to be too ostentatious. However, because it involved the guests attending the wedding, most of them were of noble status, especially someone like Shou Jie, who could not be exposed in front of the cameras. Furthermore, there were many national politicians and leaders, as well as nobles from various countries. If the media were to expose it, it would be too much of a fuss. She wanted to keep a low profile. Yo-Yo said from the side, "You're already destined to not be able to keep a low profile after marrying a perfect man like Daddy." At the side, Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun were amused. "Yo-Yo's words are amazing." Mu Yaja was elated when he heard that. As a father, he could not help but feel smug when his son praised him so much. Yun Shusha said in annoyance, "Yo-Yo, Mommy is being serious. Mommy will be nervous if there are more than 10 media outlets following this wedding. Mommy, you've seen a lot of the world, after all. You've also been to Fashion Week. When you were filming, there were so many cameras pointed at you, but you didn't seem nervous at all. This is different." "How is it different?" Yun Shusha reiterated again, "Marriage and acting are different. If there were any mistakes during filming, they could still redo it. But when it came to marriage, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to redo it. I only have one chance in my life, so I'm very nervous." Gong Jie said, "Speaking of which, I'm curious why I'm not the best man." Yo-Yo said, "Because Daddy is afraid that Uncle will cause trouble if he doesn't like it." Yo-Yo added, "The best man's job is the most difficult. Uncle, I'm sure you won't be able to take it." Xiaoichen chimed in, "That's right. The best man is the groom's slave. Uncle, are you willing to do that?" Little Ichen replied, "It's a small matter to ruin the wedding. What if Uncle regrets it halfway and can't bear to let Mommy marry Daddy? If that happens, Daddy won't be able to chase after them." The two little fellows echoed each other. Yun Shusha snorted and snickered. Gong Jie's face turned pale. "If I couldn't bear to part with him, would I have specially rushed back to the country? For Yueyao's sake, I wouldn't ruin the wedding." He was not that pretentious. He had already silently accepted the fact that Mu Yaja was his brother-in-law. Chapter 32:21. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun, who were sitting at the side, felt that they had been implicated. They jumped up and protested, "What do you mean by the best man can't be too handsome?" "Exactly. Then what are we?" "Sister-in-law, we don't like what you're saying. Aren't we handsome?" Gong Jie was satisfied. However, Mu Yaja was displeased. "Madam, Are you saying that I'm not as handsome as brother-in-law? Gong Jie chimed in. Is there a need to ask? Sister is just worried that I'll steal your limelight if I'm the best man. Shut up. The truth is hurtful. Brother-in-law, this means that in sister's eyes, I'm more handsome than you. Shut up. Haha, I won't. Mu Yaja glared at him. Gong Jie glared back at him. Their eyes met, and there was a burst of electromagnetic sparks. Yun Shusha said, she seemed to have unintentionally started a war. Yo-Yo saw that her father and uncle were at loggerheads. She quickly tried to smooth things over and changed the topic. Uncle, how much have you prepared for Mommy's wedding? Gong Jie said, 50 million. Yun Shusha widened her eyes in shock. 50 million? Yeah. Gong Jie wrapped his arm around her arm and rested his chin on her shoulder. He smiled and said, Sister, are you touched? Mu Yaja reached out and pushed his face away. He sneered, 50 million? How petty. Petty. Gong Jie was furious. 50 million US dollars is petty. Do you want me to give you all my assets? Mu Yaja reached out shamelessly. Give it to me. Gong Jie sneered, brother-in-law, you're so shameless. Mu Yaja returned an elegant smile. No matter how shameless I am, I'm not as shameless as you. You keep saying that sister is the most important, but you only prepared a dowry of 50 million. How petty. Gong Jie gritted his teeth and said, fine, I'll give you 100 million then. 100 million? Yun Shusha sucked in another breath of cold air. She hurriedly used her fingers to calculate how much 100 million US dollars was worth. Yo-Yo watched from the side. She finally knew who Xiao Chen had inherited his poor arithmetic skills from. 100 million US dollars is equivalent to about 700 million yuan. 100 million US dollars is equivalent to 700 million yuan. It was the sound of a golden abacus. Yun Shusha felt a headache coming on as she was being hit by the money that much. How much was little Jie's net worth? How could he casually fork out 100 million? Yun Shusha doubted the credibility of this statement. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a triumphant smile. That's more like it. Keep your word, I'll be waiting for your check. Gong Jie felt that he had been tricked. His face was ashen, but he couldn't say anything to refute. Yun Shusha comforted him, it's okay, Shou Jie. When you get married, get your brother-in-law to give you 200 million. Gong Jie's eyes lit up. Really? Yun Shusha nodded solemnly. Yo-Yo held her face and screamed, Daddy, the backyard is on fire. Mommy is going to sell you. Xiao Ichen collapsed on the sofa laughing. He hugged Mu Yaja's stiff back and laughed until he couldn't catch his breath. Daddy, hurry up and earn money. Otherwise, when Uncle gets married, you won't be able to give him anything. Mu Yaja said, I refuse. 200 million? No. Yo-Yo also collapsed from laughing. Although Daddy could afford 200 million, if he took out 200 million at once, his little treasury would be empty. Among everyone present, Gong Jie had the highest net worth. Chapter 32-22. Yo-Yo was well aware of Gong Jie's wealth. His wealth was comparable to that of a country's. The annual revenue from orders in North America alone was more than a few billion US dollars. After deducting the costs, the net profit was more than 3 billion US dollars. This was only the revenue from orders in North America. Apart from that, the total volume of arms sales in Africa was even more impressive. Most importantly, Gong Jie owned 2 military factories. The arms produced by these factories were sold to various countries and were very profitable. Yo-Yo had once described Gong Jie as his uncle. He was so rich that his hand would be greasy when he touched it. Hence, 100 million US dollars was nothing to him. However, this amount was still relatively objective for his daddy. Yo-Yo's heart ached for his daddy for a few seconds. Hua Jin had rushed over from the filming set. When he opened the door and saw Gong Jie, his back stiffened instantly. Oh my God, the Crown Prince was here again. It was the Devil King. Hua Jin deliberately walked around Gong Jie and sat next to Xiao Chen. Gong Jie noticed that Hua Jin seemed to be avoiding him and frowned slightly. Why are you avoiding me? Do you think I will eat you? You will, however. Hua Jin only dared to keep these words to himself. He did not dare to say it out loud. Gong Jie was his nemesis. In his heart, Gong Jie had always been on the level of a demon king. "I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going to hug my little niece." As he said this, Gong Jie stood up and walked towards the baby's room. He had been so focused on discussing the wedding that he had not seen the little Yu Yaro that he had been thinking about day and night. When he walked into the baby's room, little Yu Yaro was sleeping soundly in the cradle. Gong Jie did not want to disturb her, so he sat quietly by the side and rested his chin on one hand. He leaned against the side of the bed and looked at her quietly. After watching for a long time, the little Yu Yaro yawned and woke up in a daze. Interestingly enough, when he saw her yawn, he unconsciously followed suit and yawned as well. It was said that if one party yawned, the other party would also be affected. Little Yu Yaro opened his eyes and looked around. When he saw Gong Jie, he raised his eyebrows slightly and raised his little hand to point at him. In Gong Jie's eyes, it looked like he was greeting him. This squishy little ball obviously recognized Gong Jie. She kicked her little legs excitedly, opened her little hands, and scratched at him. He was obviously asking for a hug. His niece was asking for a hug. As her uncle, he was naturally happy to oblige. Gong Jie reached out and held little Yu Yaro in his arms under the little girl's armpit. But the next scene made him not know whether to laugh or cry. Perhaps it was because she had slept for too long, but the little girl was a little hungry. She pulled Gong Jie's clothes with familiarity, opened her little mouth, and accurately sucked on Gong Jie's chest through his clothes. Gong Jie's back stiffened. He lowered his head and looked at the little Yueyao's greedy face. Her little mouth left a circle of water on his clothes. He was speechless. Where did he get the milk from? This scene was coincidentally seen by Yo-Yo, who pushed the door open and walked in. At first, she was stunned for a moment, then she laughed until she was convulsing with laughter. Ha 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 ha. Yo-Yo's laughter attracted a group of people over. Chapter 32-23. Gong Jie's face was gloomy. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry and looked helpless. When he saw Mu Yaja enter, he became even more embarrassed and asked Yun Shusha for help. "Sister." Ha ha ha. Yun Shusha was also laughing so hard that she doubled over. Gong Jie said angrily, "Sister, you're still laughing at me. Hurry up and feed her." Yun Shusha laughed and said, "Just you wait." She turned around to get the milk bottle. Then she walked over and handed it to Gong Jie. Gong Jie looked at the milk bottle and was stunned for a moment. After Yun Shusha explained, he realized that Yu Yaro had used too much force when she was drinking milk and it always hurt her. Hence, she used a breast pump to suck all the milk into the milk bottle and then used the milk bottle to feed Yu Yaro. She must have been drinking the milk bottle for a long time. Gong Jie shook the milk bottle gently and then brought the pacifier to Yueyao's mouth. The little girl opened her small pink mouth and sucked on the pacifier. Then she drank the milk with relish. Yun Shusha couldn't help sneaking glances at the water stains on his chest from the corner of her eye. She couldn't help but laugh secretly from time to time. After Yueyao's 100th day celebration, Gong Jie went abroad. Even though he hadn't held Yu Yaro for a long time, he was still very familiar with the way he held her. When Yo-Yo saw this, he secretly whispered in Xiao Chen's ear, "Uncle's way of holding Yu Yaro is so professional. He's much more qualified than Daddy." Mu Yaja heard him. He grabbed him by the ear and said darkly, "What are you saying about me again?" "I'm just saying that Uncle's way of holding Yu Yaro is so professional. He'll definitely be a qualified stay-at-home dad in the future, am I not?" "Of course Daddy is. Otherwise, how could he have raised Yu Yaro so well?" Mu Yaja was finally satisfied. Gong Jie watched Yu Yaro suckle and asked, "Can she talk now?" "Not yet. Little sister has just learned how to sit." That day, when they went out to play, little Yu Yaro suddenly sat up in order to snatch the toy from Yo-Yo's hands. This gave Yo-Yo a fright. After returning home, Yo-Yo told Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha that his little sister could sit up on her own. However, no matter how hard Yun Shusha tried to teach little Yu Yaro to sit up, the little girl remained indifferent. Until one day, she accidentally walked into the room and saw little Yu Yaro sitting up alone, playing with a toy. She got a shock. That was when she realized that perhaps little Yu Yaro had already learned how to sit up. However, this little girl was very lazy. Unless she was attracted by something, she would rather lie down than sit up. Gong Jie did not believe her. He moved the milk bottle away and looked at Yu Yao patiently. Yu Yao, call me uncle. Yi Yaya, uncle. Uncle. Yi Yaya. Gong Jie had an "I've lost to you" expression on his face. Yun Shusha said, she can't talk yet. If you teach her like this, she'll only think that you're playing with her. When she can talk, I'll definitely make her call me uncle first. No way. Mu Yaja disagreed. Give up. The first person she would call would definitely be daddy or mommy. Uncle? Dream on. Gong Jie sneered. How easy is it to pronounce uncle? Daddy is so difficult. Little Yu Yao will definitely not be able to learn it. However, a certain man was very confident. My daughter is so smart. No matter how difficult it is, she'll be able to learn it. Chapter 32-24. Brother-in-law, let's bet that the first person Yu Yao calls is uncle. When Yo-Yo heard this, he protested unhappily. Why can't she call me brother? Gong Jie smacked the back of his head and said in disdain, go away. This is none of your business. Yo-Yo held the back of his head and glared at him fiercely. Suddenly, he thought of something and smiled slyly. He turned around and whispered something in Xiao Ichen's ear. The latter gave Yo-Yo a knowing look and smiled mysteriously at him. The two little lads smiled slyly. At night, Yo-Yo and Xiao Ichen tiptoed through the bedroom door and slipped into the master bedroom. The door to the master bedroom was ajar. Little Ichen tiptoed into the nursery in the master bedroom and walked to the side of the cradle. He poked his head over and saw that little Yu Yao was awake. Her big eyes were wide open, and when she saw him, she was so excited that her eyes squinted and she smiled. Her little legs kicked in excitement. Xiao Ichen immediately put his finger up and gestured for her to keep quiet. However, little Yu Yao did not understand what he was gesturing at. Instead, she was curious. She widened her eyes and tilted her head in confusion. He bent down and carefully picked up little Yu Yao. Then he carried his little sister and slipped out of the room and into his own bedroom. Yo-Yo took out the milk bottle and let Xiao Ichen carry little Yu Yao. He first fed his beloved little sister milk. When the little girl was full, Xiao Ichen carried little Yu Yao in his arms. Yo-Yo looked at her and smiled gently. Yu Yao, brother will teach you how to speak, okay? Little Yu Yao smacked her lips. Her bright eyes sparkled under the moonlight. Yo-Yo grabbed her little hand and said word by word, brother, brother. He deliberately spoke slowly and enunciated each word clearly. He was teaching her seriously. When Yu Yao heard this, she was tickled by his slow speech and especially amused expression. She kicked her little legs excitedly and giggled. Ha ha ha, Yo-Yo was confused and repeated, Yu Yao, call brother. Brother, ha ha ha. Little Yu Yao kicked her little legs excitedly again. Yo-Yo held his forehead. He felt inexplicably helpless. Xiao Ichen quickly comforted him and said, Yo-Yo, don't be anxious. My sister is only 6 months old. Teaching her to speak at this time is already ahead of schedule. Moreover, she doesn't know anything and needs to be taught patiently. Hearing this, he innocently replied, Sis doesn't seem to understand what I'm saying. You're so big, but you can't understand what others are saying. Take it slow. Xiao Ichen grinned and said, you have to teach her how to call you brother first. Uncle and daddy will be furious. Me. That's right. When Yo-Yo thought of how Gong Jie would look when he heard Yu Yao calling him brother, he perked up again. Brother, ha ha ha, brother. Brother, ha ha ha. In the end, Yo-Yo's throat was almost smoking from teaching. He didn't know how this little one could laugh so easily. She couldn't stop laughing. You love to laugh. Chapter 32-25. Yo-Yo pinched her tender cheeks, only to see Yu Yao yawn. He hurriedly said, hurry up and send her back to sleep. Xiao Ichen nodded and secretly carried Yu Yao back to her room. The next day, at night, Yo-Yo calculated the time. He already knew his little sister's schedule like the back of his hand. He knew what time she would wake up in the middle of the night and when she would want to drink milk. Hence, he secretly carried Yu Yao back to his room and patiently taught her how to speak over and over again. When Yuyaro was sleepy, Xiaoichen would carry her back to the nursery. However, after 4 to 5 days, little Yuyaro did not seem to have made any progress. When he taught her to call him Big Brother, she would sometimes get impatient and kick him with her little feet. Yo-Yo could not help but feel aggrieved. After all, his mommy said that he could already say mommy when he was 5 months old. The pronunciation of mommy and mummy were several times more difficult than Gidge. In the end, after so many days of teaching, there was still no progress. Yo-Yo could not help but feel a little disappointed. Even so, he did not give up. On the eve of the wedding, Mu Yaja withdrew a stack of brand new banknotes from the bank. These banknotes were to be used to prepare red packets for the children. Each red packet contained $888, $800 bills, 8 $10 bills, and 8 $1 bills. The amount was not large and was purely for luck. However, these red packets had to be packed by hand. Yo-Yo and Xiaoichen volunteered to pack the red packets. When Yun Shusha saw that they had volunteered to share the burden, she went to the garden with peace of mind and cut some Chinese roses to be used as the bride's bouquet. On the day of the wedding, they would have an outdoor wedding and an indoor one. The outdoor wedding would be a Western-style lawn wedding, while the indoor wedding would be a traditional Chinese wedding. A Western-style wedding would have a relaxed and romantic atmosphere, while a Chinese wedding would be grand and solemn. This was also the final result of the discussion between Yun Shusha and Mu Yaja. There were both Western and Chinese elements, and they did not conflict with each other. A lawn wedding was for the young guests. It was relaxing and romantic, but as the main venue, the wedding was more solemn. After Yo-Yo and Xiaoichen sealed the red packets, another red packet appeared. Yo-Yo said that he wanted to give the red packet to his little sister. As soon as they reached the baby's room, Yo-Yo leaned over the crib and stuffed the red packet into little Yueyao's hand. "Here, little sister. This is a red packet for you. Call me Big Brother." He was merely joking and teasing her. After all, he didn't really expect his sister to be able to call out his name. However, what happened next gave Yo-Yo a big surprise. Little Yuyaro reached out her little hand and pinched the corner of the red packet tightly. Her other hand fiddled with the red packet curiously, not knowing what was inside. She held the red packet with one hand, opened and closed her little mouth, and said 2 words, "Ge, ge." Yo-Yo was really shocked. He nervously held his breath and listened carefully. Little Yuyaro gave him face. She waved the red packet in her hand and said with saliva bubbling from her pink little mouth, "Big Brother, wow." Yo-Yo was so excited that he almost jumped 3 feet high. Chapter 32-26. Yo-Yo hurriedly picked up little Yuyaro and ran into the living room. Yun Shusha was meticulously arranging the bouquet. Yo-Yo carried little Yuyaro to Yun Shusha. She was so excited that she didn't know what to do. "Mommy, mommy, little sister can speak. And the first person she can call is Big Brother." When Xiaoichen heard this, she leaned over in surprise. "Really? Really?" When Yun Shusha heard this, she didn't think much of it. She asked curiously, "Yuyaro can't speak yet. Yo-Yo, did you hear wrongly?" How could she not know that this little guy wanted to hear Yuyaro call him Big Brother even in his dreams? Yo-Yo hurriedly explained, "Mommy, little sister really said Big Brother. I really heard it loud and clear. How could I have heard wrongly? No one taught her to call him Big Brother. Why would she call him Big Brother for no reason?" Yun Shusha only knew that Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had been secretly teaching little Yuyaro to call him uncle and daddy. These 2 clowns seemed to be racing against time, fighting to be the first person Yuyaro would call out uncle or daddy. Especially Mu Yaja. In order to make Yuyaro open her mouth, he had used all sorts of methods. He had even used Yueyao's favorite toy to seduce her, but he still couldn't get her to open her mouth. There was nothing he could do about it. How old was Yuyaro? She was more than 5 months old and still couldn't speak coherently. She could only vaguely use a few syllables to indicate her emotions. She would have to wait for 6 or 7 months before she could speak. However, they couldn't rule out the possibility of her speaking earlier. Yo-Yo said, "Mommy, it's true. I've been teaching little sister to call him Big Brother for the past few days. Didn't Mommy say that I also learned to speak earlier?" Maybe little sister is smarter than me. As he spoke, as if afraid that Yoon Shusha wouldn't believe him, he gently squeezed Yuyao's little hand and said patiently, "Little sister, mommy doesn't believe you. Hurry up and tell mommy, what did you say just now?" Little Yuyao acted as if he did not hear what Yo-Yo said. He was still focused on the red packet in his hand. Her little hand was holding the red packet, almost tearing it apart, but she was playing with it enthusiastically. Yo-Yo tried her best to attract her attention. She shook her little hand and said gently, "Little sister, didn't you call me very clearly just now? Why aren't you barking now? Come on, let mommy hear it." "She doesn't believe me. Big brother, little sister, quickly call him big brother." When little Yuyao heard this, she thought that he wanted to play with the red packet in her hand, so she immediately raised the red packet in her hand and generously handed it to him. Yo-Yo was instantly amused and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, he still emphasized, "Mommy, Yuyao really did call me big brother." "Really?" Yoon Shusha's eyes turned into crescents. She smiled and said, "Okay, mommy got it. Maybe it's just a coincidence that little sister called him that once. There's still plenty of time in the future, so there will be more opportunities." Xiao Chen couldn't help but feel a little regretful that he didn't hear Yuyao call him big brother. However, according to what mommy said, there was still plenty of time in the future. Moreover, he was very open-minded. Even if he wasn't the first to learn to call him big brother, it didn't affect his love for his little sister. Little Yuyao yawned lightly, as if she was a little sleepy. Chapter 32-27. Okay. Yo-Yo obediently carried Yuyao into the room. When she came out, she sat next to Yoon Shusha and asked curiously, "Mommy, the wedding is the day after tomorrow. Are you nervous?" Yoon Shusha was stunned when she heard this. She nodded slightly and said with a red face, "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Of course I'm nervous." Even though she had already rehearsed the wedding ceremony, she felt increasingly nervous as the wedding date approached. She didn't know why she was nervous, but she just felt nervous. Yo-Yo covered her mouth and giggled. "Is Daddy nervous too?" "Daddy seems to be busy with the wedding recently," Xiao Ichen mumbled. "Sometimes, he can't even make it back for dinner. He's busy decorating the venue. I told him that there would be someone to decorate the venue, but he wouldn't listen. He said that it's his own wedding, so he has to do everything himself. I even went to the bridal chamber with Daddy yesterday. It's so beautifully decorated." The bridal chamber was at Yunshan Shiyi. Therefore, when the bride was picked up, they had to bring her to Yunshan Shiyi before going to Yunshan Shiyi Resort for the wedding. The night before the wedding, Mu Yaja went to the bridal chamber according to wedding tradition. At night, Yoon Shusha was so nervous that she couldn't sleep. She had to get up early the next morning to wash up and dress up, but she still couldn't sleep until midnight. She was worried that something would go wrong at the wedding the next day. She didn't know if Mu Yaja was asleep, so she sent a text message. "Would-be, are you asleep?" Within a few seconds, Mu Yaja replied, "Not yet." "You're still awake?" Yoon Shusha pursed her lips and dialed his number. Mu Yaja picked up the phone and asked her why she wasn't asleep. Yoon Shusha said coquettishly, "I'm so nervous that I can't sleep." "Why would I be nervous? Aren't you nervous? Close your eyes and don't let your imagination run wild. You'll fall asleep soon." "But," Yoon Shusha said hesitantly, "I'm nervous about whether the wedding will go smoothly tomorrow." On the other end, the man laughed when he heard that. "If I can't even handle a wedding, how can I be worthy of being your man?" These words were very pleasing to her ears. Her man was so reliable and gave her a great sense of security. Her heart was filled with sweetness. Yoon Shusha then said, "Then I'll go to bed early. You should rest early too." "Yes." After hanging up the phone, Yoon Shusha turned off the wall lamp and fell asleep peacefully. The next day, the alarm clock went off at 5 o'clock. Yoon Shusha woke up with a start. She was still a little groggy at first, but Yo-Yo knocked on the door and said, "Mommy, the makeup artist is here." She immediately woke up, and her sleepiness disappeared. She immediately went to the bathroom to wash up, and then opened the door. Outside the door, two makeup artists in well-ironed uniforms were dragging suitcases in their hands. This suitcase was filled with the equipment needed for the makeup. When they saw Yoon Shusha, the two makeup artists were surprised. "Oh, the bride's skin is so good. I put on a facial mask last night." The makeup artists looked at each other and smiled. Then they said to Yoon Shusha, "Shall we start the makeup?" Yoon Shusha sat at the dressing table. Starting from her face, the two makeup artists started working separately. One put on her makeup, the other arranged her jewelry and ironed her clothes. Chapter 32:28. One was a show-her dress for the wedding, the other was a wedding dress for an outdoor wedding, and the other was a traditional Chinese wedding dress for an indoor Chinese wedding. Mu Yaja had specially hired a top stylist and makeup team. Hence, even if it was a mixed Chinese and Western wedding, there was no need to worry about the makeup clashing. It was already 6 o'clock when the makeup was done. Yoon Shusha had just changed into the show-her dress when Gong Jie arrived. He walked into the room and saw that Yoon Shusha had already changed. She stood in front of the full-length mirror and let the makeup artist put on the forehead ornament for her. When she turned around, Gong Jie was really stunned. He muttered sourly as he walked toward her. "I don't know where brother-in-law got his luck from to be able to marry my sister." He stood in front of her and looked at her gently. Suddenly, his lips curled into a smile as he gently held Yoon Shusha's hand. "Sis, you're so beautiful." Yoon Shusha looked at him and asked tentatively, "How beautiful?" "The world's most beautiful." "You only know how to make me happy." "How am I making you happy?" "You're so beautiful that I can't bear to marry you off." Gong Jie's words were sincere, especially when he saw Yoon Shusha's beautiful side. He cursed fiercely in his heart. He did not know what methods Mu Yaja had used to kidnap his sister. "He won't be able to welcome you easily today." Gong Jie laughed sinisterly. "I learned about the process of a Chinese wedding last night. It's said that the groom's family has to guard the door when he welcomes the bride. He won't be able to enter the door so easily." Yoon Shusha asked nervously, "What are you going to do?" Gong Jie only sneered and did not say anything. At 7 o'clock, Xiao Shui, Mu Shi, and Junmo arrived. They had changed into their bridesmaid outfits and had their makeup done in advance. Hua Jin also hurried over. As a member of the bride's family, he was in charge of guarding the door. At that time, they would just have to wait for the groom to come and fetch the bride. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Mu Yaja arrived with his motorcade. All of them were Bentleys, and the first one was his limited edition Rolls-Royce. When he reached the door, Gong Jie closed the door and gave him the cold shoulder. According to tradition, when the groom fetched the bride's family would definitely guard the door. However, if it were an ordinary family, it would be much easier for Mu Yaja to deal with. All he had to do was to stuff red packets under the door. Mu Yaja had specially given out a few hundred red packets last night. But the problem was, would these red packets be enough for Gong Jie? A certain man had already stuffed dozens of red packets through the crack of the door. Hua Jin had already filled a bag with red packets, but the Gong Jie guarding the door still had no intention of letting him go. "Brother-in-law, this red packet is not enough to open the door." The groomsmen behind Mu Yaja immediately became restless. Lu Jinyu went to Mu Yaja's door and whispered, "Brother-in-law, this brother-in-law guarding the door doesn't seem easy to deal with." Jiang Shen was also anxious. "How many red packets have we stuffed? Shouldn't he let us go now?" Mu Yaja had already expected the Gong Jie to block the door, but today was a special day and he could not afford to be careless. Hence, he asked calmly, "Shou Jie, what do I have to do for you to let me in?" "Do 100 push-ups first." 100 push-ups. Gong Jie said again, "Do it in one go. You're not allowed to stop." Chapter 32:29. "Oh my God!" Lu Jinyu exclaimed. "His arms are going to be crippled if he does 100 push-ups in a row. How can he carry the bride?" Hua Jin's voice came from inside. "Not only the groom, but the groomsman has to do it too." Jiang Shen was flustered when he heard that. He lowered his voice and said, "Boss, you told me that being the groomsman isn't a good job. I really believed you." "Cut the crap." Mu Yaja handed him the bouquet. "Hold it for me first." Jiang Shen took the bouquet from him, only to see Mu Yaja lying on the floor and doing push-ups one after another without a word. Lu Jinyu broke out in a cold sweat as he watched from the side. His legs turned to jelly at the thought of having to do 100 push-ups later. Doing 100 push-ups was definitely not an easy task. Even though Mu Yaja had amazing stamina, his handsome face was flushed red and beads of perspiration were dripping down his face when he did the 80th push-up. Gong Jie counted carefully through the peephole. When Mu Yaja finished 100 push-ups, he said, "The groomsmen can start too." Jiangxin and Lu Jinyu had the urge to run away when they heard that. Mu Yaja glanced at them and said, "What are you waiting for?" Since boss had given the order, they had to pull up their pants and do as he said. Lu Jinyu even loosened his belt and looked like he wanted to say something. He shot a resentful look at Mu Yaja before lying on the ground with Jiangxin and starting to do push-ups. Qin Ju felt miserable and said indignantly, "Chairman Mu, why didn't you say so earlier? Why are you torturing your groomsmen? Cut the crap. Do 100 push-ups quickly." Qin Ju was so angry that his stomach hurt. He patted his stomach and secretly encouraged himself before lying on the ground with a long face. The 3 pitiful groomsmen were doing push-ups one after another on the ground. At first, they looked decent and could be considered standard. However, they gradually lost their stamina, especially Jiangxin, who had been neglecting his exercise for the past few days. When he reached the 80th push-up, he felt that it was no longer a push-up. It was a salted fish. Lu Jinyu was the first to finish. After he got up, he slumped onto the ground and began to doubt his life. Mu Yaja thoughtfully handed him a handkerchief. Lu Jinyu took it weakly and leaned against the wall, no longer caring about his poise. Jiangxin and Qin Ju finished at the same time. Both of them looked like they wanted to cry. Qin Ju said, "I've never done so many push-ups in my life." Mu Yaja faced the door and asked, "Can we go in now?" Gong Jie's voice drifted out. "How can it be so simple?" Jiangxin felt a lingering fear. "Don't tell me you're up to something again." Gong Jie said, "Do another 100 sit-up." Lu Jinyu almost fell to the ground. Qin Ju finally understood what was going on. He moved closer to Mu Yaja and said in a low voice, "Chairman Mu, I can see what he's trying to do to you. Oh, this brother-in-law of yours wants you to bow down and beg for mercy. Perhaps he'll let you in then." Beg for mercy? When Mu Yaja heard this, he realized that Qin Ju had the same idea as him. Indeed, he and Gong Jie had always been at loggerheads. Now that he had such an opportunity, it was obvious that he wouldn't let him in so easily. But asking him to beg for mercy? He would never do as he wished. Chapter 32:30. Under Lu Jinyu and Jiangxin's dumbfounded gazes, Mu Yaja sat on the floor and ordered, "Someone come and hold me down." Qin Ju immediately walked over and held him down. Mu Yaja held the back of his head with both hands and started to sit up. Lu Jinyu broke out in a cold sweat as he watched. Inside the door, Gong Jie urged, "You have to be the best man too." Jiangxin cried and begged, "Brother-in-law, spare me." Gong Jie said coldly, "Who's your brother-in-law?" Jiangxin smacked his forehead. "Aya, I can't call him that." He threw himself against the door and cried, "No matter who you are, you're the gatekeeper. You can't play like this. After 100 push-ups, my legs are weak. If I have to do another 100 sit-ups, I'd better jump down from upstairs." "Just jump. It's only the 2nd floor anyway." Lu Jinyu leaned against the door and discussed, "Brother, think about it from another perspective. On the day you get married, if your wife's biological brother stands at the door and asks you to do 100 push-ups, you won't be able to take it." Gong Jie said disdainfully, "To me, 100 push-ups is nothing. You guys are too weak." Weak? Lu Jinyu and Jiangxin were not convinced when they heard this. How dare he call us weak? No. Prove it to them. 100 sit-ups is a piece of cake. With that, Lu Jinyu sat on the floor and let Jiangxin hold his legs down as he sat up. After everyone was done, Mu Yaja stood at the door, but Gong Jie still had no intention of letting him in. Xiao Shui ran out of the boudoir and walked to Gong Jie's side. Seeing that the poor groom had not been let in, she did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Shoro Jie, are you still not letting him in? Don't let the bride wait too long." Gong Jie said, "Help me tell sister that the bride should be more reserved." Xiao Shui, In the end, it was Mu Shi who ran out to plead for mercy. Only then did the Gong Jie reluctantly open the door and let Mu Yaja in. As soon as Mu Yaja walked in, his aura surged. Hua Jin was frightened by his aura and immediately raised his hands in surrender. Brother-in-law, this is definitely not my idea. Gong Jie held his head high and puffed out his chest. He even said in disdain, I'll let you off today. Mu Yaja, when Lu Jinyu saw that Mu Yaja's face was covered in sweat, he hurriedly went forward to wipe it off for him. You must be tired, brother-in-law. Gong Jie also smiled, but the way he looked at him was very evil. Mu Yaja stared at him for a long time, his face tense for a while, then suddenly revealed a peerless smile. Just you wait, you will also have this day. Gong Jie also smiled provocatively. We'll wait and see. Mu Yaja walked to the door and knocked. His voice suddenly became gentle. Honey, I'm here. In the room, Mu Shi heard the approaching footsteps and was even more nervous than Yun Shusha. It was only when Mu Yaja's gentle voice suddenly sounded close to the door that she subconsciously reached out to open the door. Xiao Shui quickly stopped her. What are you doing? Mu Shi reacted and immediately retracted her hand. Xiao Shui glared at her and said, You can't open the door now. How can it be so easy to see the bride? Shui. Outside the door, Mu Yaja gently called her name. Be good and open the door. For a moment, Xiao Shui was mesmerized by his magnetic voice and subconsciously reached out to open the door. Chapter 32-31. Mu Yaja reached out and gently touched the bridge of his nose. He seemed to find the situation a little tricky. Qin Ju, who was beside him, pushed him away. Jiang Shun and Lu Jinyu immediately pounced on the door and slammed it hard. Open the door, open the door. Bride, open the door. Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen had just hidden their red high heels and walked to the door. When they heard Mu Yaja's voice, they snickered. Red packets. Red packets. Mu Yaja heard them and scolded inwardly, these two little rascals. What happened to the cooperation between the inside and the outside? He turned around and ordered Qin Ju, stuff them with red packets. Qin Ju quickly squatted down and stuffed the red packets through the crack of the door. Xiao Chen said greedily, Not enough, not enough. You want to send us away with these few red packets? Qin Ju continued to stuff the red packets in his hand into the door, but he still could not pass. Jiang Shun shouted pitifully from outside, Sister-in-law. Take pity on Boss, please. Boss was tortured badly by his brother-in-law. He did more than 100 push-ups and sit-ups. He's so tired that he's about to collapse. Yun Shusha, who was sitting on the bed, covered her mouth and snickered when she heard the commotion. She had long expected that Shoro Jie would not let him in so easily. How could she not know? That was why she asked Xiao Shui and Mu Shi to plead for mercy. Shoro Jie listened to her and let Mu Yaja off. However, there was still a hurdle at the door of the boudoir. Jun Mo asked through the door, Groom, do you know the bride's measurements? Yun Shusha's face turned red when she heard the sound of jeering outside the door. At a wedding, the bridesmaids were guarding the door. If the groom was escorting the bride, they would definitely come up with a few harmless questions to make things difficult for him. This question was not harsh and was just to create a lively atmosphere. Mu Yaja smiled and said, I know, but it's not convenient for me to reveal it. Is it not convenient for you to reveal it, or you don't know? Of course, I know. TSK, TSK, TSK. Xiao Shui commented, Shusha, your husband is so protective of you. There are so many groomsmen outside. Chairman Mu definitely won't say anything, Mu said. Jun Mo asked another question. Groom, the bride is asking you if you have anything to say to her. She quickly defended herself. Jun Mo, I didn't say that. Shh. Jun Mo gestured for her. Shusha, Mu Yaja's, I love you, Shusha, I love you. This was Mu's of his heart. Qin Ju was to Qin. However, Qin Ju was not satisfied and said, CEO Mu, that's all you've got. Mu Yaja smiled. I'm not done yet. Held. In the past, I only dared to say I like you, because the words I love you were too unfamiliar and too heavy. But from today onwards, I will say I love you to you every day. I've never been good at expressing myself, and I've made you suffer a lot. Along the way, We've been through ups and downs. Because of my personality, I'm not good with words and I don't know how to sweet talk. But, do you know? Every time I see you, my heart says I love you to you, whether you hear it or not. Jun Mo and Xiao Shui looked at each other. They were touched by his confession. Chapter 32-32. Muyaja continued, I, Muyaja, swear, I'll protect you for the rest of my life so that you won't have to wander around and have no one to rely on. No matter how difficult the obstacles are, I'll overcome them for you. Mu Shi wavered when she heard this. She said to Jun Mo, why don't we let the groom in? Don't make things too difficult for him. Okay. Jun Mo then said, however, we can't let him in so easily. Groom, why don't you sing another song to the bride? Sing. Qin Ju sized up Muyaja and was a little worried. Mr. Mu, can you sing a cappella? Muyaja deliberated for a moment. Suddenly, he tugged at his tie gently and sang softly. I want to sing to you while I'm young and picturesque, while I'm young and have sex, my dearest person. The journey is long, let's be together. I'll sing to you, give me your pure and innocent smile. We should be happy and blissful sunny times. I'll sing to you, touch you with my burning feelings. Okay, time is worth reminiscing and lingering, shy and blushing face, who can replace you? While I'm young and have sex, my dearest person, the journey is long, let's be together. Yun Shusha sat on the bed and listened. His voice was still clear through the door. He sang very well. In the past, she had always wanted him to sing to her, but he seemed to be very stingy and reserved. He was always reluctant to sing. Now, she was going to use this opportunity to feast her ears. The door slowly opened a gap. Jun Mo blocked the door and cleared her throat. Groom, do you want to come in? Seeing that the door was open, would Lu Jinyu and the rest give it a chance to close it? The group of people worked together to break the door open. However, even though they broke the door open, they still had to consider the 3 bridesmaids in front of the door, lest they get hurt by the door. Yo-Yo sighed. Daddy, congratulations on passing. Muyaja was in no mood to pay attention to him. At this moment, all his eyes fell on the bride sitting on the bed. It was almost 9 o'clock in the morning, and the sun shone through the window at an angle. Yun Shusha was wearing a red shoha dress as she sat upright on the bed. The gold border of her dress seemed to be plated with holy light. Her exquisite makeup, picturesque eyebrows, and bright red lips, however, did not appear to be rich. Instead, they appeared especially charming and seductive. Muyaja felt his body heating up. However, he knew that it wasn't because of the Gong Jie forcing him to drink 2 glasses of wine outside the door. It was because the woman in front of him was so beautiful that it was too tempting. Each of her outfits was custom-made by a famous designer. Her long hair was tied into a bun, and there weren't many decorations on it. A golden hairpin was enough to set off her exquisite makeup. Muyaja was looking forward to seeing her in a wedding dress during the lawn wedding. She would definitely be beautiful, dazzlingly beautiful. He slowly walked in front of her, knelt down on one knee, and presented the bouquet in his hand to her. Madam, I'm here. Yun Shusha was shy and nervous as she looked at the bouquet in his hand. Her hands were intertwined because of uneasiness. Muyaja gently guided her. Madam, come with me. Yun Shusha's gaze landed on him. Today, he was dressed more formally and handsomely than ever before. Chapter 32-33. He was dressed in a tailored suit, which made him look tall and slender. His hairstyle had also been carefully styled, and his handsome facial features had added a bit of heroic spirit to them. Even though they were together every day and hugged each other to sleep every night, today's occasion was too special. Coupled with the man's formal dressing, he looked even more handsome than before. It was to the extent that her heartbeat gradually lost its rhythm. Jun Mo reminded her cautiously, Shusha, have you received the bouquet? The groom has been kneeling for a long time. Muyaja's affectionate look moved even the bridesmaids, and they could not bear to make things difficult for him. Yun Shusha then reached out and gently took the bouquet from her. Before she could retract her hand, Muyaja's large palm covered her hand and held it tightly. He leaned forward slightly and hugged her shoulders. Muyaja whispered into her ear, My wife, you're so beautiful today. Yun Shusha's face burned again. She was so embarrassed that she did not know what to do in front of everyone. Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen suddenly said, "Daddy, you can't take Mommy away now, okay?" "That's right. Daddy, you can't take Mommy away yet." The group of people was secretly amused by the two amusing little fellows. Mu Yaja was a little puzzled. "What's wrong?" "Here. Look at Mommy's feet." Yun Shusha stretched out her legs, only to see that her feet were bare. She looked up and glared at him with a red face, reminding him, "Hurry up and find the shoes." Qin Ju smacked his forehead and immediately said, "Groom, the bridesmaids have hidden the high heels. You have to find them within the time limit, or else you won't be able to take the bride away." "Moo," she said innocently, "we didn't hide them, it was the two little guys. We don't know where they hid them." Mu Yaja glanced at Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen. The latter pretended to look up and did not look at him. D***MN. Were these two fellows really his sons? Not even a hint. Mu Yaja ordered, "What are you waiting for? Find my shoes." At his command, Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen immediately started rummaging through the cabinets. Qin Ju, on the other hand, was very reserved. He was not like the others who were like wolves and tigers, leisurely opening drawers to look for wedding shoes. However, things were not as simple as they thought. The room was a suite. It was very big, but she still couldn't find it in the wardrobe or under the bed. When everyone returned to the center of the room, they were still confused. The shoes were hidden by the two little fellows. He didn't know what the two little fellows were thinking and where they hid the shoes. All the places with storage functions had been searched, but there was nothing. Mu Yaja immediately asked, "Yo-Yo, you must have hidden them. Where did you hide them?" "I won't tell you." The little guy was very arrogant. How could it be so easy to pry open his mouth? Mu Yaja pursed his lips and immediately walked over. He squatted in front of him and pulled him into his arms. Lowering his voice, he said, "Good Yo-Yo, can you bear to see Daddy anxious? It wasn't easy for Daddy to pass your uncle's test. Do you have the heart to make things difficult for Daddy?" "Of course you can," Yo-Yo snorted. "If it wasn't difficult at all, how could I let you get the beauty so easily? How could there be such a good thing in the world?" Chapter 32-34. Yo-Yo pushed him away in disdain. His heart softened a little as he snorted and said arrogantly, "I can't tell you where it is, but I can give you a hint." "Okay." How could this guy be so smart? He even knows how to keep people in suspense. Yo-Yo walked to the bed with his hands behind his back. He cleared his throat and said, "The hint I'm going to give you is, 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing." 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing? The group of people scratched their heads in confusion. Jiang Shen was baffled. "Where's the boat here? Or is it a toy or model of the boat? Maybe these two little ones have hidden it in the toy or model." The groomsmen all gave their suggestions. Mu Yaja only pondered for a moment before he suddenly thought of something. He walked to the bed and lifted the pillow. Indeed, a red high heel was quietly hidden under the pillow. He held the high-heeled shoes in his hand. Only then did everyone have a flash of inspiration and come to a sudden realization. Qin Ju smacked his forehead and clicked his tongue. "Aya, why didn't I think of it? Isn't the next sentence of 100 years of hard work leads to a shared boat crossing similar to 1,000 years of hard work leads to a shared pillow? It must be hidden under the pillow." At the same time that the group of people was enlightened, they could not help but be impressed by Yo-Yo's meticulous thinking. Normally, when a normal person wanted to hide a pair of wedding shoes, they would just randomly find a corner to hide it. Therefore, when they were looking for the shoes, they deliberately chose a corner and neglected the most obvious place. This boy, even when hiding a shoe, he was so knowledgeable and particular about it. This 1,000 years of hard work leads to a shared pillow was very meaningful. She could not help but exclaim, "Yo-Yo is so smart, I didn't expect it to be hidden here." Jun Mo asked curiously, "Where's the other one?" Yo-Yo immediately denied responsibility and said, "Xiao Chen hid the other one, not me." Mu Yaja turned to look at Xiao Chen. The latter had a smug look on his face, as if he was waiting for a certain man to approach him. "Daddy, do you want to know where the other one is hiding?" Little Chen blinked his eyes mysteriously, appearing extremely unfathomable. Mu Yaja walked over and held his chubby little hand. He said fawningly, Chen, you just received so many red packets from Daddy. You can't not help Daddy. Say something nice for me. Xiao Chen's request wasn't too much, so Mu Yaja naturally agreed to it. He gently pinched his son's cheeks and coaxed, Daddy loves Xiao Chen the most. Yo-Yo was a little unhappy when he heard this. He snorted at the side and said, I'm useless. Daddy loves Xiao Chen the most, so what about me? Everyone burst into laughter. Mu Yaja couldn't coax the two little guys to fight over Mommy's affection. However, in the end, Xiao Chen made a request and asked Mu Yaja to carry his mommy and do a few deep squats. Wow. Amazing. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Fortunately, Yun Shusha recovered well after giving birth. As she was pregnant, her figure was indeed a little out of shape when she just finished her confinement. However, she persevered and lost weight. However, no matter how thin she was, she still had some weight. Chapter 32-35. For the sake of finding the wedding shoes, Mu Yaja naturally obeyed. Thus, he carried Yun Shusha in his arms and did 10 standard push-ups. Even so, this valiant man still managed to complete the push-ups perfectly. Xiao Chen then ran to the back of the door, took out the high heels that were hidden in the corner of the door, and handed it to him. Hua Jin, who was standing beside him, said, This is shameless. If the groom didn't find it, it doesn't count. Xiao Chen put her hands on her hips and said, Why doesn't it count? I'm the groom's son. If I find it, it'll count as Daddy finding it. Okay. It counts, it counts. Hua Jin held back his laughter and nodded. Mu Yaja walked to the bed with a pair of wedding shoes and knelt on one knee. The wedding shoes were a beautiful red with high heels and lace as embellishments. He said gently, My wife, I'm going to put on the shoes for you. Yun Shusha looked at him, and he looked back at her. His handsome eyes seemed to contain a vast universe, deep and enchanting. She remembered that she had read a fairy tale about Cinderella in the past. The prince had also knelt in front of Cinderella like this and carefully put on her crystal shoes. In the past, when she was pregnant, she could only wear sneakers. When she went out for a walk, her shoelaces would occasionally loosen, and he would patiently crouch down to tie them for her. But now, when he held the high heels and was about to put them on for her, she still blushed because of shyness in front of so many people. Her cheeks, which were originally blushed, now had a charming blush on them. She shyly lifted the hem of her dress and slowly stretched out her bare feet. He reached out his hand and held her small foot with one hand. He gently put the high heels that symbolized happiness and nobility on her foot. My wife, come with me. Seeing this scene, everyone cheered excitedly. She immediately sprinkled the petals on the happy newlyweds. Mu Yaja held her hand and kissed her passionately. At the side, Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen covered their eyes shyly. They felt shy, but they could not help but peek through the gaps between their fingers. Mu Yaja carried her in his arms. Gong Jie made things difficult for him. He blocked the elevator door and asked him to carry her down the stairs and then carried her to the wedding car. Yun Shusha didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Shou Jie, you don't have to make things difficult for your brother-in-law anymore, right? Gong Jie raised his head arrogantly. It's not that easy to marry my sister. Yun Shusha still wanted to say something, but Mu Yaja beat her to it. That's fine too. I want to hold her for a while longer. He bowed his head and hugged her even tighter. He carefully carried her down the stairs. She was a little worried. After all, they had to go up the 3-story stairs and pass through the garden. He had done so many intense exercises earlier, including push-ups and squats. She was worried that his stamina would not be able to take it. Can your stamina take it? Mu Yaja bowed his head and looked at her deeply. There was a hint of ambiguity in his eyes. He smiled and said, Don't worry. I still have to save enough energy for tonight's wedding night. When she heard this, her face turned even redder. Why was this man still saying such indecent things even now? She was angry and amused at the same time. Mu Yaja saw that her face was very red, but it looked even more charming. He could not help but lower his head and kiss her cheek. Chapter 32-36. The groomsmen behind them could not take it anymore. Their mouths were stuffed with dog food and they could not take it anymore. I say, you two newbies, you should stop before you go too far. Consider us. That's right. Why did I have to be chief's groomsmen? I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore, Chin-ju muttered painfully. I want a wife too. His words resonated with the two single dogs, Jiangshan and Lu Jinyu. A single dog is still a dog. Chief, please be merciful and stop abusing the single dogs. You have to cherish the little animals. Yun Shusha became even more bashful at their incessant chatter and shyly buried her face in his chest. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. When he turned around, his expression was stern. You guys should know when to stop. The group of people immediately shut up. He carried her downstairs and walked out of the door, only to find it crowded with people. Yun Yecheng was sitting in a wheelchair with Minute Yu pushing it. He was waiting at the door. When he saw Yun Shusha being carried out by Mu Yaja, he was so touched that he could not help but shed tears of joy. Minute Yu immediately took out a handkerchief and gently wiped his tears. Yun Yecheng sighed. I have no regrets in life now that I've seen Yun Shusha be happy and see her off on her wedding day. Minute Yu nodded and patted him on the shoulder comfortingly. Uncle, today is your daughter's big day. You can't cry. Yun Yecheng hurriedly nodded, holding back his tears of gratitude as he looked on with teary eyes. Zhong Wansan brought his wife over. They came with heartfelt blessings. When they saw Mu Yaja carrying Yun Shusha out, they congratulated him. The little boy who bullied Yo-Yo that day was also present. However, this time, he came with gratitude. When he went home that night, he closed his eyes. However, Yun Shusha's gentle eyes appeared in his mind. Perhaps, Yun Shusha's act of kindness had completely changed Zhong Wansan's family. Therefore, they were grateful and gave their best wishes to their wedding. When Yun Shusha saw that so many people were watching, she blushed and said, "There are so many people, you should put me down." No need. But, Yun Shusha looked around shyly. Seeing so many people surrounding them and looking at them, she felt a little embarrassed. Mu Yaja said, "Ignore them." From the entrance of the villa to the main entrance, there was a long red carpet. However, this red carpet was a little special. It was covered with rose petals. From afar, it looked like it led to the Garden of Eden. A gentle breeze blew over, and the thick layer of flower petals on the carpet fluttered in the wind. At a glance, it was as if one was in a sea of flowers, romantic and beautiful. This gave her quite a pleasant surprise. Yesterday, these petals didn't even exist. Mu Yaja must have sent someone to lay out the red carpet and flower petals this morning. No wonder Xiao Shui could not hide her amazement when she walked in and said that she was especially looking forward to this wedding. She must have looked forward to it after seeing this romantic arrangement. These rose petals in sight were all genuine. It was not cheap to lay them out from home to the main entrant. He had spent a lot of money on this wedding. She was both heartbroken and touched. Chapter 32-37. However, he had said that this was the only wedding he had in his entire life. He had made it grand, not to show off, but to give her an unforgettable memory. He would record the entire wedding. He would keep this recording well. After the vicissitudes of time, when they were old and grey-haired, they would look back on these beautiful images together and feel a lot of emotions. At that time, he would tell her that he would use his entire life to fulfill the promise he had made at the wedding. He carried her and walked to the main entrance. The fleet of cars was quietly waiting for the happiest couple in the world at that moment. The chauffeur opened the car door. He carefully lifted the hem of her dress and helped her into the back seat. She shyly held his hand tightly. Under the envious gazes of everyone, she slowly rolled up the car window. Only then did she relax a little. She leaned her head on his shoulder and clutched at her heart, which was thumping non-stop. Mu Yaja looked down at her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I'm just a little nervous. Later, do we need to welcome the guests?" "I'll be in charge of welcoming the guests." Then he knew that she was nervous, so he kissed her little mouth to comfort her and said gently, "Madam, don't be nervous. This is a wedding, not an execution ground, okay?" Yun Shusha nodded. The wedding venue was set at Yun Shan's poetic villa. Mu Yaja had sent people to seal off the huge holiday villa within a 10-mile radius. As the guests were all important people, the security measures had to be strictly enforced. Those who could enter the wedding venue had to have a verified invitation card. Otherwise, no matter how influential they would not be able to enter the wedding venue. The Rolls-Royce stopped at the entrance of the venue. Mu Yaja held her hand and got out of the car. The styling team, who were waiting at the venue, immediately came up to Yoon Shusha and said, "Bride, come with us to change into the wedding gown." Yoon Shusha's eyelashes fluttered. Only then did she remember that one of their wedding ceremonies had a lawn wedding. In a moment of nervousness, she had forgotten. Yoon Shusha turned around and exchanged a look with Mu Yaja. The latter gestured for her to follow them. Only then did she follow the stylist. The venue welcomed the guests in an orderly manner. The guests entered one after another. Soon, Gong Jie arrived in the car and took care of the wedding matters with Mu Yaja. Yoon Shusha changed into her wedding gown, readjusted her hair and makeup. She waited quietly with the makeup artist for the wedding ceremony to begin. A few flower girls had also arrived at the venue. Because her wedding dress was a long one, she needed 2 flower girls to hold the hem of the dress for her. When she saw the 2 flower girls, she was surprised. They were 2 blonde Lolita and a little Shota. The little Shota was wearing a suit with suspenders and a bow tie, just like a little gentleman. The little Loli was wearing a fluffy princess dress that was whiter than snow and had a flower crown on her head. She looked like a flower fairy. The little Lolita was the younger sister and the little Yoon Shusha was the older brother. It was said that they were a pair of twins born to country MS Prime Minister, Roger Alton. He had always been on good terms with Mu Yaja. When he found out that he was getting married, he volunteered to send a pair of children over to be flower girls. Mu Yaja, of course, gladly agreed. Chapter 32-38. Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen arrived at the dressing room and saw the 2 flower girls. Little Lolita looked like she was about to cry. She looked so pitiful and pitiful. Yoon Shusha immediately pulled little Lolita in front of her and asked in fluent English, "What's your name?" Little Lolita saw that she was speaking to her in English and instantly felt close to her. She opened her mouth timidly and said in a childish voice, "Sunny. Sunny. What a nice name." Little Lolita politely said, "Thank you, you." She suddenly turned her head and stared at Xiao Chen curiously. Yo-Yo saw that she was staring timidly at Xiao Chen and immediately reached out to tug at Xiao Chen's sleeve. "She's looking at you." Xiao Chen curiously followed his gaze and turned to look at little Lolita. She blushed and hid in Yoon Shusha's arms. Her long eyelashes fluttered and she was as beautiful as a fairy. She seemed to be shy. Beside them, the little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes let out a bell-like laughter. He pointed at Sunny and said, "Sunny, don't be afraid. I'll protect you." Yoon Shusha looked at the little boy and asked gently, "What's your name?" "My name is Angelo." Xiao Chen suddenly hooked his arm around Yo-Yo's shoulder and asked curiously, "Mommy, why don't you let Yo-Yo and I be your flower girls?" "If it's a flower girl, there must be a boy and a girl together," Yo-Yo said. "It's a pity that little sister is only 6 months old." Xiao Chen turned around and looked at the 2 little guys worriedly. They looked to be about 4 or 5 years old. He didn't know if they would cause any trouble at such a young age. He had attended a prime minister's wedding with Mu Yaja before. The bride was also entered by 2 little flower girls. The boy held the ring pillow while the girl held the dress. The ring pillow was an important part of a Western-style wedding. The ring was tied to the pillow and the flower girl would pass it to the bride and groom. Then, the bride and groom would exchange rings. However, after entering the venue, perhaps because she saw so many guests at once, she got stage fright. She accidentally stepped on the hem of her wedding dress and fell to the ground. Before she could cry, the little boy beside her saw her fall and was so frightened that he fell to the ground and hugged the ring pillow in his hands and started to bawl. The crowd's children's, but they didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they saw how uncooperative they were in such an occasion. Events crying, as the wedding ceremony was to continue. To the wedding ceremony to stop crying, Lolitas. Finally, Yo-Yo-Yo, and, she, Yo-Yo-O to Yo-Yos. Yo-Yo, to Yo-Mommy. Com. Yo, he. To it, he. To tus. To the yos. Her cries of despair echoed throughout the hall. Chaos ensued. In the end, the adults had no choice but to carry the two little guys off the stage. Only then could the wedding proceed. Xiao Chen's worry was not unfounded. Chapter 32-39. Just as Xiao Chen was feeling conflicted, the MC came to the dressing room and said to Yun Shisha, "The ceremony has begun." Yun Shisha immediately became nervous again. The MC brought two flower girls to the venue. When Yo-Yo saw that Yun Shisha was still sitting there uneasily, he walked up to her and said, "Mommy, why are you still standing there like a fool? The ceremony is about to begin. You can't let Daddy wait for too long." Yun Shisha clenched her fists and said to him, I'm a little nervous." When Yo-Yo heard this, he smiled helplessly. He walked up to her and gave her a gentle hug. Yo-Yo is nervous too, but I'm more looking forward to it than nervous. He had already adjusted his state of mind. Previously, he had rejected it, but now, he had accepted it and even looked forward to it. This was because Daddy had transformed into a real man, a man who understood love and had a strong sense of responsibility. If he entrusted Mommy to such a man, he would definitely be able to give Mommy a lifetime of happiness. Yun Shisha slowly stood up. Yo-Yo and Xiao Chen hurriedly went behind her and lifted the hem of her wedding dress. When they arrived at the venue, the MC was interacting with the groom and the guests. The atmosphere was relaxed. Mu Yaja's back was facing the backstage area. Facing the flower arch, the MC said to the guests, "Now, shall we invite the bride to come out with a round of applause?" Naturally, the guests gave him face and applauded. Mu Yaja held the bouquet with his back facing Yun Shisha. Just as Yun Shisha was about to walk up to him, Gong Jie suddenly stopped her and said, "Sure." Then, he tiptoed behind Mu Yaja. The guests were trying hard not to laugh. Even Yun Shisha was amused by Gong Jie. She covered her mouth and snickered. Gong Jie stood behind Mu Yaja and deliberately lowered his posture. He gently put his arm around his waist, looking like a cute and lovable bird. It was really amusing. The MC said seriously, "Now, the groom, please turn around and face the bride." Mu Yaja was actually a little nervous. He slowly turned around, only to be met with Gong Jie's close-up handsome face. He was so shocked that he took half a step back with a look of disgust, afraid that he would not be able to avoid him. "Why is it you? Why can't it be me?" Gong Jie burst into laughter and asked in disdain. He was originally looking forward to welcoming the beautiful bride. He could even imagine Yun Shisha standing behind him in a holy wedding dress. However, when he turned around, there was a man standing behind him, and it was his archenemy, Gong Jie. Mu Yaja was so scared that his heart stopped. Good-natured laughter came from the guests. Mu Yaja stared coldly at Gong Jie. "Get lost." Gong Jie let out a cold snort and retreated from the stage. The MC immediately said, "It seems that the groom is not sincere enough to welcome the bride. I'll give the groom another chance. Now, the groom, please turn around and wait to welcome the bride." Mu Yaja turned around and stared meaningfully at the MC. Obviously, he was telling him with his eyes that he didn't like the joke just now. Yo-Yo said softly to Yun Shisha, "Mommy, it's your turn to go on stage." Yun Shisha nodded and walked forward slowly. The two flower girls immediately ran over obediently. The little Loli held up the hem of her dress while the little Shota held the ring pillow and walked beside her slowly towards the groom. Chapter 32-40. Mu Yaja heard the commotion behind him. Without waiting for the MC to speak, he turned around. However, even though he was mentally prepared, when he saw Yun Shisha, he was still stunned. He had attended some weddings before. At weddings, when some grooms saw the bride wearing a wedding dress and standing in front of them, they would be so emotional that their eyes would moisten. It had to be said that men did not easily shed tears. However, at such a moment, when the woman he loved appeared in front of him in the most sacred wedding dress, his heart would surge with emotions. Some emotions would come violently, and it would be difficult for him to control them. Mu Yaja stared at the person in front of him in a daze. As the sunlight shone on her body, her pristine wedding gown seemed to be coated with a layer of sacred radiance. It was so dazzling that he felt a little dizzy, The wedding dress was a strapless design, which happened to reveal her beautiful shoulders and collarbones. She wore a pink diamond necklace around her neck. This necklace was personally put on for her when he first went on a date with her. It had not left her side for so long. Originally, the stylist wanted to give her a sparkling diamond necklace, but she preferred this special necklace, which unexpectedly matched the wedding dress very well. The wedding dress was designed by a famous designer. It was tailor-made, and the waist design completely showed off her exquisite figure. On the chest, there was a white rose made of silk, and it was embellished around the edge of the tube top. It perfectly covered her breasts and made her look noble and elegant. Her ink-black hair was tied up in a beautiful bun. A few strands of curly hair hung over her ears, which made her even more charming and charming. It was different from the makeup she wore during the wedding. At that time, her face was so exquisite that it seemed to glow. Her delicate eyebrows were like the clouds in the distant mountains. Her jet-black eyelashes were long and curly. Without much eyeshadow, her eyebrows and eyes were as beautiful as a painting. Her perky nose bridge did not need any highlight decorations. It was natural. Unlike many brides who wore heavy makeup, she wore makeup but it was very clean. Her face was naturally beautiful, and after careful carving, she was as beautiful as a fairy. Especially that pair of picturesque eyes, they were like obsidian. When she lowered her eyes, the light in her eyes shimmered. Even though she was separated by a thin veil, it added a sense of mysterious beauty. He looked at her and couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. He didn't even dare to rashly step forward and disturb this beauty. Yoon Shusha faintly smiled as she looked at him. She had imagined her wedding countless times, but the Real wedding was even more dreamy than she had imagined. Even though she didn't think much of the wedding before. After all, as far as she knew, he was the only man in her life. Even if there was no need for a wedding to prove it, this fact would not change. But, when she stood in front of him in her wedding dress, it was a different feeling. It was said that a woman had to wear a wedding dress once to be considered a complete woman. As for Mu Yaja, it was a completely different feeling. He had imagined such a scene countless times, but none of his fantasies were as impactful as witnessing it with his own eyes. His heart was so touched that it was about to overflow. Chapter 32:41. He looked at her with a smile on his lips, but his eyes were also sour. He had experienced countless touching moments, such as when Yuyara was born. He held such a small bundle of milk bun in his arms, and was filled with emotion. However, there was no moment more impactful than this. He lowered his eyes slightly, then raised them again, and walked towards her. His deep eyes hid a burning passion, and he did not hide his deep admiration for her. He walked in front of her, gently hugged her waist, and said in a low voice, "Shusha, are you trying to charm me to death?" When Yoon Shusha heard this, she couldn't help but blush. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and when she looked at him again, her face was slightly red. He handed the bouquet to her, and when she took the bouquet, the large palm that was holding her waist pressed down hard. He hugged her, lowered his head, and sealed her lips. Even though the MC had repeatedly emphasized that if he wanted to kiss the bride, it would be best to kiss her forehead, so as to prevent her lipstick from rubbing off and dirtying her makeup, he couldn't control himself. He couldn't care less about so many things, and didn't care that there were so many guests watching. With such a beautiful bride standing in front of him, could he still be expected to care about those rules and regulations? Yoon Shusha was kissed, and at first, she was still a little shy, but she also couldn't control herself, and unconsciously, she held onto his shoulders, and responded to his kiss. She seemed to be unable to hear the clamor of the crowd. At this moment, in her world, only this man, only she, could affect her emotions. Everything, couldn't be controlled. After the kiss, he looked into her bright eyes, and finally smiled. She also cupped his cheeks, and gently used her fingers to wipe away the moisture at the corner of his eyes. The two of them touched their foreheads, and looked at each other affectionately, as if there was no need for those complicated words of love and vows. The deep feelings between them were self-evident. The so-called vows were all done step by step, but some feelings couldn't be expressed by vows. She suddenly felt that those vows and promises were really not that important, because, from his doting eyes, she saw her own future. Her future life, would definitely be happy and complete. No matter if she was rich or poor, he would protect her for the rest of her life. He suddenly hugged her tightly, and the corner of his mouth curled up into an innocent smile like a child's. You finally belong to me. Under the witness of so many guests, this person at the top of his heart finally belonged to him. Under everyone's witness, he carefully lifted her hand, and slowly put a beautiful pink diamond ring on her finger. The diamond of this diamond ring was not big, and it was probably only 50 carats in size. It wasn't that he couldn't afford an expensive diamond ring, but Yunshusha said that if it was a big diamond ring, it would often be inconvenient for her to wear. Previously, the diamond ring during the engagement ceremony was too big. Sometimes, it was inconvenient to take it off because it was too big. In her mind, she didn't need to rely on a ring to show off her status and wealth. She also didn't need to deliberately to show. And she didn't particularly like the big carat diamond ring. The diamond ring didn't need to be too big. To her, the most meaningful thing wasn't the bigger the diamond, but the longer she wore it, the better it was. Chapter 32:42. Xiao Ichen was relieved. At least the two flower girls didn't cause any trouble. Perhaps they had undergone special training, as they didn't have stage fright when they went on stage. All the guests present looked at the newlyweds in amazement. Mu Yaja was married. This man, who had always been the center of attention and looked down on everyone, actually had such a tender side to him. It was such a luxurious wedding, but it wasn't hard to see how much effort he had put into this wedding. While they were amazed at the extravagance of the wedding, they were also touched by the details of this wedding. No matter how big or small, he had done it personally. After that, Yunshusha changed into a Chinese-style han-tang dress and entered the main hall with Mu Yaja for the classical ceremony. In comparison, a Chinese-style wedding was more formal. However, even after the touching kisses on the lawn, the guests were still jealous. The men were jealous that Mu Yaja could marry such a beautiful wife. The women were jealous that Yunshusha could marry a man who loved her so much and treated her like the apple of his eye. Her life could be said to be perfect. After the ceremony, when the guests were about to take turns to toast, the door of the hall was suddenly pushed open. The door of the hall was extremely heavy. Hence, no matter how noisy the hall was, when the heavy door was pushed open, everyone was attracted by the sound and looked in the direction of the sound. Mu Yaja and Yunshusha were originally toasting, but when they heard the sound, they turned their heads and looked puzzled. Why would the door be opened for no reason? All the guests were present, and no one was left out. There were also guards outside the hall, and no one was allowed to enter. Why? Yunshusha looked in the direction of the sound and saw a tall figure standing at the door against the light. Because of the backlight, she couldn't see his face clearly. However, based on his silhouette, she could vaguely tell that he was a very tall man. From the aura he exuded, he must be a middle-aged man. She could vaguely see that he was wearing a trench coat and had an extraordinary aura. However, he was different from the average middle-aged man. He had an extraordinary aura. Even though his appearance could not be seen clearly, his aura could be felt as if they were in the same situation. Gong Jie was standing behind Yunshusha. When he saw him, his heart skipped a beat and he muttered unconsciously, "Father." Yunshusha turned pale with fright when she heard this. Father, the man whom little Jie addressed so respectfully as his father was none other than. Mu Yaja was suspicious, but he saw the man standing there for a moment before walking towards Yunshusha. It was only when he slowly walked into the venue that his handsome features were exposed under the lights. The man held a pipe in his hand. What entered everyone's eyes was a handsome face. Even though it was stained with the traces of time, it was still difficult to conceal that handsomeness. He must have been an elegant and handsome man when he was young. He was still wearing that British-style suit. His well-built body gave him an extraordinary aura. His eyes and brows were similar to Gong Jie's, and they were incomparably deep. It was hard to imagine that such a man's real age would be. He looked like he was only in his 30s, but after experiencing the vicissitudes of life and the vicissitudes of time, his every movement exuded a charming aura. Chapter 32:43. Yo-Yo was also shocked. He could vaguely recognize that this man was the rumored founder of the Hurricane Group, Gong Shaoying, the head of the Gong family. Previously, Gong Jie had shown him a photo of Gong Shaoying, and it had left a deep impression on him. Now that he was seeing it with his own eyes, he was extremely shocked. Gong Xiaoying walked slowly into the hall. Perhaps his aura was too oppressive, but the entire hall was silent as he walked in. Everyone was so oppressed by his aura that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Gong Jie was extremely shocked. He didn't know why his father was here, and he didn't know how his father knew that today was his sister's important day. Could it be that his father already knew that he had disappeared for so many days because of his sister's wedding? So he followed the clues and found his way here personally. Yo-Yo was even more bewildered. He gently tugged at Gong Jie's hand and asked, "Uncle, why is he here?" Gong Jie looked at him blankly. Yo-Yo asked suspiciously, "Were you the one who told him that today is Mommy's wedding?" "No." Gong Jie immediately denied it. "Regarding this matter, I've never mentioned a word to him." Mu Yaja also saw the man's face clearly. He had never seen Gong Xiaoying before, but just from his facial features and appearance, he knew who he was. Gong Xiaoying. There was no other reason. It was because his features were extremely similar to Gong Jie's and Yun Shusha's. Especially his eyes, they were similar in form and spirit. Why was he here? However, Gong Xiaoying's appearance didn't cause him much panic. On the other hand, Yun Shusha was a little flustered. For a moment, she looked at the man who was closing in on her. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. It wasn't until the man walked in front of her and stopped in his tracks that she became even more flustered. Her hands were tightly clasped together as she looked straight at him. For a moment, she actually lost her sense of propriety. Gong Xiaoying was more than a head taller than her. She was 1.7 meters tall, but she only reached his shoulders. His imposing height was comparable to Mu Yaja. She finally realized who Gong Jie had inherited his high altitude from. He lowered his head to look at her. Although the woman in front of him was already 25 years old and a mother of 3, in his eyes, no matter how he looked at her, she was still a child. When he saw the face up close, Gong Xiaoying tried his best to remain calm, but his mind was still in turmoil. On one hand, it was because this face was too similar to the woman he had been dreaming about for decades. On the other hand, it was because the beautiful woman standing in front of him was his own flesh and blood. She was beautiful, really beautiful. She looked exactly like her mother when she was young. He had always thought that this daughter of his had unfortunately died a few years ago. His heart ached so much that he thought he would never see her again in this lifetime. However, it wasn't until he saw her face up close that he believed the truth. His daughter was still alive. For a moment, Gong Xiaoying was at a loss for words. He just looked at her quietly, wishing that he could use this limited time to make up for the 20 years he had missed. Yun Shusha didn't know what to do. She was a little embarrassed by his gaze. She put her hands behind her back and averted her gaze. Gong Xiaoying finally spoke, "Raise your head." She looked up and met his deep eyes. Chapter 32:44. Gong Xiaoying looked at her seriously. His gaze fell on her brows and eyes, then moved down to her upturned nose. She looked exactly like Mu Qingcheng. Her cherry lips were charming and moving, just like in his memory. She stood on the stage, holding the microphone and singing a decadent love song. She was very flirtatious. So similar, so similar. Her appearance seemed to slowly overlap with the appearance of the woman in his memory. The more he looked at her, the more Gong Xiaoying's hands trembled. He subconsciously raised his head, wanting to touch her, but he was afraid. He was worried that this was just an illusion. Shusha. He called her name. That was his daughter's name. The woman standing in front of him was the daughter he had missed for more than 10 years, the daughter that woman had given birth to for him. Gong Xiaoying could not help but feel his heart ache. The memories that had been sealed in his heart seemed to have broken out of their cocoons. Scenes after scenes flashed before his eyes like a merry-go-round. The first time he met Mu Qingcheng was at a banquet. At that time, he was a young man in his early 20s. It was the time when he was young and vigorous. He had also been a playboy and had many women. Born in a maritime family, he had traveled extensively and had seen a lot of the world. His heart gradually became wild. The reason why he came to the capital was that as the heir, he had followed his father to the capital to attend a business meeting. At night, There was a banquet and his father asked him to attend on his behalf. At the banquet, he saw her. Mu Qingcheng was wearing a gorgeous gown. Although it was in the style of the 90s, it could not hide her unparalleled elegance. Once his eyes met hers, he couldn't take his eyes off her anymore. Gong Xiaoying had been educated in the West since he was young. Hence, he was open-minded, unlike the reserved Asian men. He recognized her and extended an olive branch to her, inviting her to dance with him. At first, Mu Qingcheng accepted her invitation only because she was too embarrassed to refuse, so she agreed. At that time, Gong Xiaoying was definitely a playboy. Even though she had seen many men in her career as a singer, she had never seen such a handsome man. So much so that when she was dancing, she repeatedly made mistakes because of her nervousness. However, he didn't mind at all. Instead, he felt that her nervous appearance was actually very cute. Gong Xiaoying was also a powerful figure. After just one dance, he had already figured out her identity and background. Therefore, the story of a romantic love affair was a natural development. What he remembered most was when he asked her to go on a cruise. At that time, it was still the Lantern Festival. He had booked the pleasure boat. She wore a cheongsam to attend. Her graceful figure was charming and moving. He was a normal man. With a beauty in his arms, he couldn't help himself and had her on the boat. She had also retreated because she was reserved. After all, they had only been in love for a few months at that time. Although they had survived in a nightclub environment, her personality was relatively conservative. But what kind of man was Gong Xiaoying? After a round of lovey-dovey, he had conquered her. At night, she wore his jacket and leaned against the side of the boat. She stretched out her slender jade hands and played with the clear ripples of the lake. On the surface of the water, one by one, there were lanterns floating by. She had made a wish that she could accompany the person she loved for life. Chapter 3245. She was not his only woman. In the past, when he traveled with his father to various countries, he had also befriended some socialites from the upper-class society. However, most of them could not hold on to him and would often be thrown to the back of his mind after the passion. It was not that he was too promiscuous. It was just that some fate did not belong to each other. However, when fate brought them together, success came naturally. At that time, he really believed that this woman would be his lifelong companion. However, later on, when Mu Sheng found out about their relationship, he strictly forbade her from seeing him again. Mu Qingcheng, on the other hand, had a secret rendezvous with him behind his back. She said, "Brother Xiaoying, I've decided on you in this life. You can't let me down." When he heard this, he was overjoyed. As he kissed her, he promised her, "Qingcheng, I'll never let you down. With you in my life, I won't have any regret." She even thought that he was a poor lad who came out of nowhere. She even swore to be with him for the rest of their lives, where they would have to haggle over every ounce of necessities. If not, how could a relationship be such a complicated and mysterious thing? Sometimes, decades of feelings could not compare to a few months of friendship. Although the two of them had been in love for a few months, it felt as if the world had changed. This was a special feeling. Even if he had other women by his side after that, he had never felt this special feeling before. It was the kind of feeling that, as long as she was by his side, even if the world came to an end, he would have nothing to fear. Hence, when his father asked him to go overseas to take over the maritime affairs in Asia and Europe, he agreed to leave the capital with her and go far away together. Mu Qingcheng blushed in embarrassment and agreed. However, when the agreed date came, she did not show up. He thought that this lady probably regretted it and did not have such deep feelings for him that she would abandon everything and leave with him. However, many years later, when she contacted him again by chance, he was indignant. When he repeatedly asked why she did not show up that day, she broke down and cried, "Brother Xiaoying, I can't come." No matter how much I begged and even knelt in front of that man, he still refused. I wanted to leave secretly, but he put me under house arrest. I can't go. Mu Qingcheng's tears were like raindrops on a pear blossom, causing his heart to clench. Towards the Mu family, she harbored an unforgettable hatred. She said to him, "Brother Xiaoying, I'm pregnant with your sons, a pair of twins. When will you come and take me away?" I've been looking forward to meeting you. Only then did he know that not long after he left, she found out that she was pregnant. After being put under house arrest, she originally wanted to protest by going on a hunger strike, but when she thought of the flesh and blood in her stomach, she couldn't bear to do so. After enduring the humiliation for so long, she finally got the chance to escape that kind of hell with the help of the servants. She tossed and turned in bed. In order to avoid being noticed, she took root in a very remote place and gave birth to a pair of twins. She gave birth to them and gave them names. When Gong Xiaoying found out about this, he threatened to make things difficult for the Mu clan. At that time, the Gong clan was no longer the same as before. It was just a small maritime family. After a few years of consolidation, under his operation, the Gong clan grew stronger and stronger. They were now completely on par with the Mu clan. Chapter 3246. At the same time, Gong Xiaoying wanted to find her, but under such complicated circumstances, it was not easy to bring her back to his side. Mu Qingcheng did not have a fixed residence. In order to escape from the Mu family, she changed places many times and led a very down-and-out life. His heart was filled with thoughts of her and the son and daughter she had with him. He followed the address she provided, but often, by a strange combination of factors, she was already gone. He was tied up with Eurasian Shipping's affairs and could not go there personally. Unable to be in two places at once, he could only entrust her and his children to a trusted aide in the country. That aide of his had some authority, so with him covering for them, Mu Sheng could not find Mu Qingcheng's whereabouts in a short time. Until that day. He would never forget that day. They had agreed to meet at a port, and his men would bring her back to him. However, after waiting for a day and a night for 24 hours, he felt as if he had waited for a century. Alas, after waiting for so long, she still did not appear. In the end, he missed her again. This time, he missed her for a lifetime. Instead of waiting for her, he received the news of her death. His men brought back a good-looking boy covered in scars. Due to external injuries, he had temporarily lost a part of his memory. He didn't even remember his own name, his own mother, and even his most beloved sister. Only then did he know that Mu Qingcheng had died in a car accident. The other child had also died tragically in a car accident. This child was the only survivor. That moving voice and face that he had been longing for was something that he would never be able to see again in his entire life. The man, who had never shed a tear all this while, burst into tears that night. Regret, hatred, anger, helplessness, and sorrow flooded his heart. His heart was in so much pain that it felt numb. He originally thought that the car accident was a natural disaster, but he did not expect it to be a crime. Mu Qingcheng's car had been tampered with, and she was chased relentlessly on the way to the port. He hated it. He hated Mu Sheng's heartlessness. He regretted it. He regretted listening to her words back then and not harming the Mu family's foundation. This was how Mu Sheng repaid him for his mercy. Because of such a disaster, he and his beloved would be separated forever. The Mu family, this term, had become the two words that he hated the most in his heart. For a very long time, he would always wake up from nightmares. Mu Qingcheng's voice and face would appear in his mind, but he could not touch her at all. In order to walk out of the shadow, he had once placed his longing for Mu Qingcheng on other women who looked similar to her. But in the middle of the night, only he knew in his heart that the woman he truly wanted would never return to his side. Together with his daughter who had died prematurely. However, now that he saw the woman standing before him with his own eyes, he finally believed that he hadn't lost his daughter. His daughter was still alive. However, when he recovered from his memories, Gong Xiaoying's gaze slowly fell on Mu Yaja. The hatred in his eyes was self-evident. When Gong Jie saw him, his scalp went numb. He immediately realized that things had gotten a little tricky. One had to know that his father's hatred for the Muse was deep-rooted. Hence, he had kept Yun Shesha's matter from him and had never revealed it to him from the start. Chapter 3247. Good, very good. Gong Xiaoying had a gloomy expression on his face. He swept a deep glance at Gong Jie and said coldly, "Is this the reason why you kept going back and forth to Country Z without telling me?" "Father, shut up." Gong Xiaoying was furious. His shocking aura made everyone in the huge venue stop breathing. Gong Jie lowered his head guiltily and stood at the side without saying a word. He had always been in awe of Gong Xiaoying. This man was his father, as well as the founder of the Hurricane Group. Although he usually treated his son warmly, once he got angry, he would definitely turn into a raging lion. No one dared to go against him. Although he was proud, he would not go against his father's will. Yun Shusha was even more displeased when she saw Gong Xiaoying berating Gong Jie in front of so many people. "Sir, this is my wedding. If you have come with your blessings, then please take a seat and witness my happiness. If you have come with hostility, then please leave this place and walk out of this door. I do not welcome you." She said the last few words with a pause between each word. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. No matter how angry he was, he could only be at a loss in front of her. "Mister." Look at the way she addressed him. It was so distant. However, it wasn't unreasonable for them to be so distant. After all, for more than 20 years, ever since she was born, the father and daughter had never met. He had never seen her, and she had never seen him. It was inevitable for them to be distant. However, this did not stop him from being close to her. He said, "Shusha, you probably don't know who I am, right?" "I know." Yun Shusha took a deep breath. "Your name is Gong Xiaoying. You are Xiao Jie's father and my mother's lover. Since you know that I am your father, then why?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned. "Do I need to repeat myself?" However, Yun Shusha did not hold back. Perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying's appearance had ruined her wedding, or perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying had reprimanded Shou Jie in front of her. She was unhappy with him, so her tone was aggressive. "If you're carrying your blessings, I'll arrange a seat for you immediately. If you insist on destroying it, then I will ask you to leave." Hostility. Gong Xiaoying laughed helplessly. "You're my daughter, and I'm your father. I can't wait to dote on you, so why would I be hostile to you?" Yun Shusha was shocked. She thought that he was going to give her his blessings, and her expression softened a little. However, she heard Gong Xiaoying say coldly, "But I will never allow you to be with him." After Gong Xiaoying finished speaking, his gaze fell on Mu Yaja, filled with hostility. She was well aware of who the he was referring to was. Yun Shusha's face turned ashen. At the side, Yo-Yo looked at Gong Xiaoying and then at Gong Jie. For a moment, he had mixed feelings. According to seniority, the man in front of him was his grandfather, and also his superior. He was rumored to be the famous CEO of Hurricane Group, Gong Xiaoying. However, why didn't he feel a sense of closeness? Mu Yaja was silent for a moment. It was not because Gong Xiaoying's aura was too intimidating, but he had to take Yun Shusha's wishes into consideration. After all, this was a matter between father and daughter. If they wanted to acknowledge each other, he could not interfere. Chapter 32-48. This man's appearance was within his expectations, yet it was also beyond his expectations. What he had expected was that the Gong family would find out about Yun Shusha's existence sooner or later. When that time came, a dispute would be inevitable. What he had not expected was that he would suddenly appear at their wedding, catching them off guard. Yun Shusha turned to look at Mu Yaja. She suddenly mustered up her courage and reached out her hand, tightly interlocking her fingers with his. She turned to face Gong Xiaoying and smiled. "Since you don't give us your blessings, then, can I ask you to leave this place?" Gong Xiaoying's face turned ugly. "Today is our wedding. I don't want anyone to ruin it, including you." Yun Shusha paused for a moment, then said, "If you must acknowledge me as your daughter, then please acknowledge him as well. My husband, the man I have chosen for my entire life. If you can't acknowledge him, then I can't acknowledge you either." Gong Xiaoying's heart turned cold. He questioned her, "Do you know who he is?" "He's my husband. There's no doubt about it. He's from the Mu family." Gong Xiaoying interrupted her. "You should know who caused your mother's death." "I know." "Since you already know, Mr. Gong, then forgive me for asking. Back then, you clearly knew where my mother was." Yun Shusha's eyes suddenly reddened. She vented all the resentment and anger in her heart. "Since you knew where my mother was, since you knew about our existence, why didn't you come to find us personally? If you had come personally, such a car accident would have been avoided, right?" Gong Xiaoying was at a loss for words. So, why didn't you come? Yun Shusha's voice gradually became hoarse. She asked mournfully, do you know how long my mother waited for you and waited for you? Do you know how much she suffered silently for you? Loneliness, helplessness, hesitation, confusion. These were all bestowed upon her by you. When she was young, she used to see her mother sitting by the window, pruning the flowers and looking into the distance. She asked why her mother always sat by the window. His mother was always silent. Until one day, she got up from the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed in disappointment. She was clearly smiling, but she looked like she was about to cry. I'm waiting for him. She was waiting for the man she loved to suddenly appear in her sight one day. She was waiting for the day when she sat by the window and saw him appear outside the door. He waved at her and said gently, Ching Cheng, I'm late. Yun Shusha said aggressively, but why didn't you come? Is it because you have someone else you love, or is it because you are too busy with your so-called career? She was like a needle piercing him, causing him to feel unbearable pain in his heart. Gong Xiaoying closed his eyes, feeling as if his heart was bleeding. Yun Shusha said, what does this mean? This means that to you, my mother is probably not as important as glory and wealth, right? Gong Xiaoying froze. Her words only made him feel a stab in his heart. The old scar seemed to have been ruthlessly torn open again, and it was so painful that it bled non-stop. Those bloody memories appeared before his eyes again. The man staggered and couldn't stand steadily. Chapter 32:49. Mu Yaja's heart ached as he pulled her into his embrace, only to hear her continue hatefully. You don't understand how torturous it is to wait for someone. You also don't understand how hopeless it is to wait for someone who may never appear in your life. Do you know, my mother used her entire life to wait for someone? Every word was like weeping blood. Gong Xiaoying was in so much pain that he could hardly breathe. He staggered a step, his body on the verge of collapsing. Gong Jie immediately went forward to support Gong Xiaoying's arm. Heartbroken, he said, Father, sister and brother-in-law are truly in love with each other. I know how difficult it was for them to get to where they are today. Father, I hope that you won't hold on to those old grudges and give brother-in-law and yourself a chance. He used to hate the Mu family to the core, but in the face of his sister's happiness, he gave in. He also hoped that his father would give in. Gong Xiaoying swatted his hand away and questioned, give him a chance. Then, who will give me and your mother a chance? Yun Shusha froze. Gong Xiaoying glared at Mu Yaja and said coldly, the Gongs and Mus are irreconcilable enemies. Irreconcilable enemies, huh? Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. He reached out to pull Yun Shusha into his embrace to declare his stance. Mr. Gong, I hope that you know that the person standing before you is not only your daughter but also my wife, Mu Yaja. Similarly, she is also the woman whom I have decided to spend my life with. The reason why you hate the Mus so much is none other than Mu Sheng's interference in their relationship back then. That's why they ended up being separated forever. However, do you want to imitate him and be an executioner who breaks up lovers? Executioner? Gong Xiaoying's eyes widened in shock when he heard that. How could he be an executioner? I don't care where you stand. Since you're here, I might as well tell you where I stand. Mu Yaja looked up and met his gaze. His gaze was cold but firm. I know that the Hurricane Group is famous, and I also know that it's hard to find another family in the world that can compete with the Gong family. I'm even more aware of your strength than mine. But even so, it will not shake my determination to be with Shusha. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. Although the young man in front of him had an incomparably young and handsome face, his arrogant aura was on par with his, not the slightest bit inferior to his. As the saying goes, the younger generation will surpass the older generation. Even though the current Mu Yaja might not be able to enter his eyes with that little bit of strength, Mu Yaja still had a long way to go. However, it was hard to predict what this young man's future would be like. Mu Yaja's face was unperturbed. He held Yun Shusha's hand tightly and said nonchalantly, if you're willing to acknowledge me, then I'll be very grateful. However, if you're unwilling to acknowledge me, then I'm prepared to be enemies with the Hurricane Group. After a pause, he said meaningfully, I only hope that you're prepared to repeat the same mistakes. Repeat the same mistakes? Gong Xiaoying could not understand the meaning behind his words. Mu Yaja curled his lips and said word by word, "You don't want your biological daughter to hate you like how you hate the muse, do you? Mr. Gong." Gong Xiaoying stood rooted to the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. Chapter 3250. You don't want your biological daughter to hate you as much as you hate the muse, do you? Yo-Yo finally could not hold it in any longer. He stood in front of Yun Shisha and told Gong Xiaoying, "My daddy and mommy are truly in love. Gong Xiansheng, you can't really bear to break up daddy and mommy, right? Mommy has set her sights on daddy, and Xiaoichen and I have our sights set on daddy, too. I don't want to lose him because of your interference." Gong Xiaoying lowered his eyes and his gaze fell on him. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Suddenly, he recognized this adorable little milk bun. Previously, when his men had gathered information about Yun Shisha, there was information about these two children. Genes were such a miraculous thing. Back then, Mu Qingcheng had given birth to a pair of children for him, and her daughter had given birth to a pair of adorable grandchildren for him, too. At that time, when he looked at these two photos, he was filled with emotions. It turned out that he even had grandchildren. These two little lads were really adorable. Their skin was fair and tender, and their eyes were watery. He could vaguely see the shadow of Mu Qingcheng in them. These were his two grandchildren. One was Yun Tianyu, and the other was Mu Ichen. Yo-Yo looked at him. In front of such a powerful man, he did not show any respect. His expression was calm and composed as he looked up at him. Xiao Ichen looked at him timidly. He knew that this man was his mommy's father and his grandfather. However, he could not feel any closeness at all. "Mr. Gong, please think about it carefully. Is hatred so important? Is it so important that even mommy's happiness can be sacrificed?" Gong Xiaoying's lips trembled violently. He looked up and glanced at Yun Shisha. The woman standing in front of him was the daughter he had been longing for, but now, she had an unfamiliar expression on her face. In her eyes, there was hostility and probing, but more than that, there was fear. Of course, she wanted to acknowledge him. But, towards him, how could she not hate him? However, what she said was not wrong. If he had been able to find Mu Qingcheng personally back then, perhaps there wouldn't have been so many accidents. Furthermore, there was no eternal separation between heaven and man. She was right. However, this didn't mean that the feud between the Gong and Mu families could be written off just like that. For so many years, he had not been able to walk out of this place. It was not something that could be done with just a few words from her. Gong Xiaoying sized up Mu Yaja, who was standing in front of him. Such a young man, handsome and charismatic. The younger generation will surpass us in time. She could tell that this was an outstanding and extraordinary man, one who was not inferior to her in any way. He knew very well that such a man would definitely be able to protect his daughter and make her happy for the rest of her life. It could also be seen that he had deep feelings for his daughter. However, he could not convince himself to accept such a man as his son-in-law. Gong Xiaoying's thoughts were in a mess. He suddenly felt a headache. His mind was in a mess. He suddenly turned around and took a deep breath. Holding his forehead, he walked away in a lonely manner. His retreating figure looked even more bleak and desolate. Gong Jie chased after him and wanted to support him. However, Gong Xiaoying pushed him away slowly and said in a low voice, "Let me think about it alone." "Father," he wanted to say something. Gong Xiaoying raised his hand to stop him and sighed. "You don't have to say anything." Chapter 3251. After Gong Xiaoying's departure, there was a brief silence before the wedding proceeded as planned. None of the guests knew what had happened earlier and merely treated it as an unexpected interlude during the wedding. It was impossible for them to know Gong Xiaoying's identity. Naturally, they did not know that the person who had left the venue dejectedly just now was Gong Xiaoying, the founder of Hurricane Group. Although Gong Jie was feeling conflicted, he quickly put those unpleasant matters to the back of his mind. When the ceremony ended, it was time for the toast. Yun Shisha changed into a red gown and walked down the hall with Mu Yaja to toast everyone. At this segment, Mu Yaja naturally could not escape from being forced to drink at this rare opportunity. However, why else would he specially choose Jiang Shun and Lu Jinyu to be his groomsmen? Not to mention Qin Ju and Lu Jinyu, Jiang Shun, who had the worst alcohol tolerance among the three, could drink half a liter of white wine with his eyes closed. During the toast, the business partners of Shengyu Financial Group, who usually had business dealings with Mu Yaja, intended to force him to drink. These were all CEOs with extraordinary backgrounds, and some of them were on good terms with Mu Yaja in private. Of course, it would be inappropriate for him to refuse. However, at this time, the alcohol tolerance of these three groomsmen came in handy. Mu Linfeng and Mu Yangcheng sat among the guests, feeling uneasy as if they were sitting on pins. They had also received the wedding invitation. Mu Yaja said that, after all, they were a family and were blood-related. Since it was his wedding, he had to send them an invitation. Naturally, whether they came or not was their business and had nothing to do with him. Initially, Mu Linfeng thought that this wedding was probably a trap. However, after thinking about it carefully, Mu Yaja valued Yun Shusha so much that he would definitely not cause any trouble at the wedding. Hence, they went as promised. However, at the venue, they saw an extremely luxurious wedding. Mu Linfeng was especially upset. The most unpleasant part was none other than the wedding venue. Among the VIPs, some were the country's political leaders, and some were the big bosses of financial groups. Among them, there were a few familiar faces that they had just met. Recently, the Mu Group's capital chain had a gap. Hence, Mu Linfeng was in a terrible fix. Mu Yangcheng was even thinking of ways to rope in some investors to alleviate this difficult situation. However, he was rejected several times. When he finally managed to contact the main body, the other party said that they had already established a partnership with other financial groups and did not have the capital to invest in the Mu Group. When Mu Linfeng arrived at the wedding venue and met with these investors, he felt even more awkward. It turned out that these financial groups that had been on good terms with the Mu Group had been roped in by the Shengyu Financial Group. This Mu Yaja was really ruthless. No wonder he was so disdainful when he left the Mu Group back then. It turned out that he had already secretly laid out a way out. After the Shengyu Financial Group went public, there were a series of attacks on the Mu Group. However, other than that, he did not leave them any way out and took such drastic measures. Was he trying to shut the Mu Group down? Now, what was the purpose of inviting them to the wedding? Did he want them to witness with their own eyes that, even after leaving the Mu Group, he could still achieve glory on his own? In contrast to the Shengyu Financial Group's glory, it made the Mu Group look even more down and out. Chapter 3252. Mu Yangcheng felt even more indignant inside. On the one hand, he was jealous of Mu Yaja's talent. Even though he had left the Mu Group, he did not lose everything. In fact, the glory that he had gained was even greater than before. On the other hand, he looked back at him. He loved Meng Qingxue so much, but his marriage with Meng Qingxue was not something he could take for granted. So what if he became the head of the Mu family? He was still a puppet. No matter how big or small, he had to act according to Mu Linfeng's wishes. By the time Mu Yaja brought Yun Shusha to their table for a toast, all the guests at the table stood up excitedly. Only Mu Linfeng and Mu Yangcheng remained seated sullenly. They looked uneasy, a little awkward, and more than that, uncomfortable. They looked at Mu Yaja again and saw a calm smile on his face. Did he expect that a toast would be enough to erase all enmity with a smile? When Mu Yaja saw Mu Linfeng, his lips curled into a smile as he said lightly, "Second uncle, you're here." His attitude wasn't arrogant, but he wasn't very respectful either. His respect for him was limited to calling him second uncle. Only then did Mu Linfeng stand up with a glass of wine in his hand. He glanced at him and then at Yun Shusha. He wanted to force a smile, but in the end, he could only squeeze out a sinister expression. It was not a smile, but it was also not a smile. It was especially awkward. "Congratulations." He said this and then gloomily raised his glass and downed the wine in one gulp. He thought to himself, "This lad is still giving me face. He didn't skip my table." When Mu Yangcheng saw Mu Linfeng stand up for a toast, he reluctantly stood up with a glass of wine and said indifferently, "Second brother, I wish you a happy marriage. Similarly, he downed the wine in one gulp. The two of them sat down in silence, not saying a single extra word. In their eyes, Mu Yaja was undoubtedly flaunting his prowess. But in reality, a certain black-bellied man was indeed flaunting his prowess. He invited them to the wedding because he was certain that the two would not fall out due to the occasion. Since they were willing to come, they would also give him face. However, Mu Yaja's motive was not simple. There were many VIPs and business partners present. He also wanted to let them see the strength of the Shengyu Financial Group. Selfishly, he also hoped that the Mu Group would not make any moves against him in the future. Second uncle, Yang Cheng, since you're here, I'd like to express my gratitude. Let all the unpleasant things that happened between you and the Mu family fade away with the wind. Mu Yaja poured another glass of wine and toasted him. The corners of Mu Linfeng's lips twitched for a long time before he had no choice but to stand up and force a smile. Yaja, second uncle, of you. Look at your glorious achievements now, second uncle is happy for you. Mu Yangcheng was indignant, but he still stood up. Jiangshen walked over and looked at him with disdain. He filled his glass to the brim and said indifferently, Second young Master Mu, today is our chief's big day. Since it's a rare gathering, let's eat and drink well. When Mu Yangcheng heard this, he felt as if he had swallowed a fly. Eat and drink well? He was already giving face by not spitting it out. This Jiangshen was really asking for a beating. Mu Linfeng deliberated for a long time before he suddenly said, Yaja, it's just nice. It's rare to see you, so I'd like to discuss something with you. Chapter 32:53. He had wanted to talk to Mu Yaja about the Mu family in front of everyone. Now that he had been rebuffed by such a casual remark, he felt extremely embarrassed. After Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha had left, Mu Linfeng was still unable to catch his breath. He sat in his seat with an ashen face. This brat had grown wings now. He even dared to refute his word. However, he did not think about how he had tried so hard to drive Mu Yaja out of the Mu family, leaving no room for negotiation. Now, it was simply wishful thinking for him to get any benefits from Mu Yaja. The people sitting at the same table as him were the directors of several multinational consortiums. When they heard this, they smiled and said, Second Mu, today is CEO Mu's big day. What business do you have that you have to talk about on the table? Don't tell me it's about the Mu Group's recent shortage of funds. Wang Qianxia, the director of Shenghua Financial Group, laughed and said, I heard from my assistant some time ago that someone from the Mu family came to see me. Second Mu, is it about this matter? Haha. How could the Mu family have a shortage of funds? Another man, whose background even Mu Linfeng did not know, was actually on the same level as Wang Qianxia. He laughed and said, Mr. Wang, you haven't been in the country for so many years. Don't you know? The Mu family is the wealthiest family in the capital. The consortium manages hundreds of millions of assets. How could there be a shortage of funds? Mu Linfeng could not express his bitterness. He was holding back his anger but had nowhere to vent it. That's right. The Mu Group used to be rich and powerful. Its capital pool managed hundreds of millions of assets. It used to be glorious. However, these funds were controlled by several directors of the consortium. When Mu Yaja left, these shareholders quickly withdrew their shares and took hundreds of billions of assets with them to the Shengyu Financial Group. Now, the Mu Group only had a reputation. However, only Mu Linfeng knew what it was exactly. It was already considered good if the Mu Group's capital pool could have a few billion in funds now. The company had a pile of bad debts and countless old debt. There were so many assets under his name that were crying piteously for financing, but there was a gap in the capital chain. Every day the project was put on hold, the losses would increase by tens of millions. Now, he was already heavily in debt and could not make ends meet. Now, they could only rely on the medical industry to survive, but they didn't know how long they could last. Many projects became non-performing assets and were forcibly purchased by the state. On the surface, the Mu family was still a glamorous and wealthy family, but no one knew how difficult it was for Mu Linfeng to maintain this reputation. However, he could not admit defeat, nor could he spread the news that Mu Group was no longer what it used to be and was insolvent. If he did that, the few shareholders who were originally guarding Mu Group would definitely leave when they saw that Mu Group was no longer as powerful as it used to be. In previous years, Mu Yaja had been the one to lead the board of directors. The meetings were all about investment and development in various fields. Now, in addition to constantly reporting bad debts, Mu Linfeng was also racking his brains to appease the board members' anxious emotions and construct an ideal investment direction for them. However, no matter how perfect the blueprint was, it was just empty praise. The Mu Group had really lost its momentum. Mu Linfeng had also thought that if not, he might as well thicken his skin and simply invite Mu Yaja back to take charge of the overall situation. However, he could not swallow his pride and did not dare to act rashly. He was afraid that Mu Yaja would be ambitious and take over the Mu Group in one fell swoop. Chapter 3254. Mu Yangcheng also had a rough idea of the Mu Group's current situation, but he was not as capable or smart as Mu Yaja. If he had half of Mu Yaja's business talent, perhaps he would be able to lead the Mu Group out of this crisis. Just like back then, when Mu Sheng was unable to recover from the setback caused by the Gong family, Mu Yaja took over the position of CEO and quickly took control of the situation. After a few years of incompetence, the Mu Group regained its glory. However, he was not Mu Yaja and did not have the same brain as him. He did not know how he managed to turn the tide back then. Mu Linfeng was thoroughly disappointed in him. He was too confident back then and thought that the Mu Group could continue to prosper under his control even without Mu Yaja. Alas, he was too conceited and lost everything now. Who else could he count on in the Mu Group? Mu Shuminit? Or Mu Yangcheng? They were all good-for-nothings. When the wedding was over and Mu Yangcheng helped Mu Linfeng out of the venue, Mu Linfeng slowly turned around and looked at the luxurious Yunshan Shiyi villa. He could not help but feel sorrow in his heart. It seemed that he was wrong back then. Of all things, she should not have schemed against Mu Yaja. She should not have ruined the Mu Group's great foundation because of a single mistake. If Mu Yaja had not left the Mu Group back then, it would be logical for him to retire and live out his remaining years in comfort. However, he was too paranoid back then. He was paranoid about having all that vanity, glory, power, and desire. Under such desires, he made such a decision. Sigh. Mu Linfeng let out a regretful sigh as tears welled up in his eyes. He said hoarsely, "Yangcheng, if only you had half of that lad's talent, it would be good, good." Mu Yangcheng instantly felt uncomfortable when he heard that. Even when he became the head of the Mu family, he still could not escape the fate of being compared to Mu Yaja. "Second uncle, why are you sighing like that again? You don't understand, you don't understand." Mu Linfeng thought of the predicament the Mu Group was in right now. There were all sorts of matters that had no head or tail, and there was no good way out or retreat. Instantly, he felt exhausted. He waved his hand repeatedly as tears streamed down his face. "I only hope that the Mu Group doesn't fall into my hand." Mu Yangcheng was shocked to hear that. "How can that be? Second uncle, what do you mean by that? You should know what kind of situation Mu Group is in now. If we can't find a way out, Mu Group will be finished. Even if Mu Group's capital chain is broken, don't we still have the medical industry?" Mu Yangcheng comforted him. "The Mu Group's annual revenue from the medical industry is considerable, so you don't have to worry about it. Mu Group is losing money every day. If this continues, the medical industry will collapse. What I'm most afraid of is that if we keep wasting time like this, one day, the Mu Group will finally be unable to do anything. At that time, that brat will take action and forcibly purchase the medical industries under the Mu Group's name. At that time, the Mu Group would be doomed forever. The Mu family, the richest family in the capital, will also become history." Mu Yangcheng was frightened when he heard that. He said indignantly, "How can Shengyu Financial Group be so powerful? Can they casually take out tens of billions? Back then, I underestimated him too much." Chapter 3255. After Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha left the wedding venue, the remaining matters were naturally handed over to Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun to take care of. Gong Jie also stayed behind to take care of it. Yun Shusha initially wanted to stay behind to entertain the guests, but Yo-Yo said, "Mommy, leave the rest to us. As for you and Daddy, Just enjoy your wedding night. Yoon Shusha couldn't help but blush. Gong Jie knocked him on the head and chided, do you know what's going on with the wedding night? Don't just talk about it. Of course I know. Yo-Yo raised his hands and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled meaningfully and said, isn't it just that? Oh, uncle. Gong Jie was speechless. She felt helpless and touched at the same time. Since they had said so, she would let go of everything and properly enjoy her newlywed life. At night, she took a shower and walked into the room. The wedding dress she had taken off lay quietly on the bed. She sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the wedding dress, and gently stroked it. Her heart was filled with satisfaction. She was so happy that it was a little out of this world. This man always surprised her time and time again. This wedding had touched her greatly. Hence, even though the wedding was over, she was still immersed in the bliss of being a newlywed, so much so that she didn't realize that the man's footsteps were quietly approaching her from behind. Mu Yaja hugged her from behind and gently rested his chin on her shoulder. He asked calmly, what are you looking at? Yoon Shusha looked up and met his gentle gaze. For a moment, her heart softened. Why do I feel like today is like a dream? A dream? Yeah. Yoon Shusha said a little embarrassedly, I feel like I'm too happy. I'm so happy that I feel like I'm detached from reality. It's like I'm in a dream. Because of her happiness, her smile became sweet and moving. Her face was flushed red, making people want to kiss her. When Mu Yaja heard this, he felt that her words were extremely interesting. Why would I give you such an illusion? I never thought that I would have such a dreamy wedding. The next second, Mu Yaja hugged her waist and pinned her on the bed. His tall body was on top of hers, and his arms were propped on either side of her. His large palms gently caressed her hair as he studied her clean face. He lowered his head and gently kissed her on the lips. At first, it was just a light kiss, but gradually, he was not satisfied with such a light kiss. The tip of his tongue nimbly pried open her lips, and he wanted to go deeper. Yoon Shusha also hugged his shoulders and responded to him shyly and passionately. The two of them continued to kiss until the kiss ended. Her breathing was slightly hurried, but she saw a hint of playfulness in the man's eyes. He asked meaningfully, now, do you still think it's a dream? Mu Yaja kissed her lips gently again. His large palm reached into her bathrobe and he smiled even more devilishly. Do you still not feel that it's real? His large palm clasped her shoulders and pulled her bathrobe down to half her shoulders. His handsome face buried in her neck as he continued to ignite her. Yoon Shusha's body arched up sensitively, and her gaze gradually became beautiful. Mu Yaja pecked her cheek gently and said seductively, my dear, there's a saying that a moment of sex is worth 1,000 gold. Have you heard of it? Her face burned even hotter. Chapter 32:56. Madam, the night is long. Tonight is our wedding night. Let's not let this precious night go to waste, okay? Mu Yaja suddenly leaned over to her ear and sucked on her earlobe with his thin lips. His warm breath made her shiver. She was about to beg for mercy when the man sucked on her earlobe and said slowly, you don't know how long I've been waiting for this moment. After a pause, he suddenly smiled and said, I've been waiting for it even in my dreams. This sentence caused the temperature of her entire body to rise in an instant. Yoon Shusha's face was extremely red. She looked into his eyes shyly, feeling touched and shy. We're already married. It's time to change the way you address me. He reminded her that now that they had held a wedding and he had held a coronation ceremony for her in front of everyone, she was already his legal wife. Yoon Shusha then realized it. She blushed and immediately corrected herself. Hubby. Yeah, I'm here. As Mu Yaja said this, he was very patient and didn't move. As if she knew what he was waiting for, Yoon Shusha pursed her lips and reached out her hand. Because of her nervousness, her fingertips were trembling slightly. She gently clasped one end of the collar of his bathrobe, and then slowly removed it for him. This was the first time in her life that she had taken the initiative to serve him. She instantly felt that her breathing was faintly hot. Mu Yaja was very satisfied with her initiative. He kissed her lightly from time to give her encouragement. Yoon Shusha suppressed her guilty conscience and removed his bathrobe. She hugged his shoulders and gently kissed his shoulder. The warm breath of her lips brushed against his skin. It was as if there was an electric current that quickly spread to his limbs and bones. It was just a kiss, but it easily ignited him. No matter how determined a man was, he couldn't control himself. He pulled over her car and held her waist. With a twist, he changed their positions and helped her sit up. The sky and earth spun. She suddenly realized that she had changed her position. She was shocked. The man gently encouraged her. "Tonight, you're up there, huh?" Yoon Shusha understood his motive. Her face was like a cloud of fire that was about to burst into flames. In bed, he rarely used this position. In fact, he had been coveting it for a long time. However, because of her reserved nature, he was worried that she would be shy. Every time he wanted to get her on top, he wanted to enjoy her complete seduction. However, in the end, it was all for naught. This time, he decided to be forceful. Using such a posture, he took possession of her without any explanation. In the room, warmth lingered, charming and gentle. He had taken her twice. Initially, she wanted to continue, but she was exhausted and sleepy. She pushed him and said coquettishly, "Didn't you say that you're leaving for your honeymoon tomorrow? You're so tired, what if you can't get up?" "No." Mu Yaja still wanted it. "Madam, I haven't touched you in a long time. I want you, but what if I can't get out of bed tomorrow?" She almost blurted it out. It was only when she saw the playful look in the man's eyes that she suddenly realized what nonsense she had said. She bit her lip shyly and glared at him unhappily. However, the man said, "If you can't get out of bed, I'll carry you onto the plane." "You. Stop fooling around." Chapter 32:57. Time to sleep. Since she was unwilling to do so, he did not force her. He restrained himself from thinking about this matter and laid down beside her. However, he was still holding her in his arms. Even though he had stopped, his large palms were still moving up and down her body, unwilling to let go. Yoon Shusha hugged his large palm and said coquettishly, "Stop moving." As if to change the topic, she asked, "Where have you booked this honeymoon trip?" "It's a secret." However, the man pretended to be mysterious. "You'll know tomorrow." "What?" Yoon Shusha's curiosity was overflowing. Her anticipation for the honeymoon trip was no less than her anticipation for the wedding. Now that the wedding was over, she had been racking her brains to guess where the honeymoon trip would be. The Maldives. However, since she had already been there the last time, there was no point in going again. Italy? The Czech Republic? This didn't seem to be this man's usual style. The more he didn't tell her, the more curious she became. As a result, all the sleepiness in her body disappeared in an instant. She hugged his arm and asked coquettishly, "Tell me, where are we going on our honeymoon trip? At least give me something to look forward to." "If I don't tell you, you won't look forward to it," he asked back. She choked and shook her head. No, little fool." The man smiled. His large palm stroked her hair gently and said, "Be good, don't think too much. Wait until tomorrow, and you will naturally know." "Oh." Yoon Shusha pouted unhappily. Clearly, she couldn't stop her imagination from running wild. She suddenly asked again, "How many days will you be gone? Can you at least tell me? You can stay for as long as you want." "Hey." Yoon Shusha was puzzled. "What about you?" "Of course I'll be with you. Something's wrong. You're actually willing to leave Yuyaro behind. When the time comes, don't expect your daughter to cry when you're in a foreign country." Mu Yaja frowned. "I won't." Crying? How could he possibly cry? However, he was a little reluctant to leave Yuyaro behind on their honeymoon, but it was a little unrealistic to bring his daughter along. He took the honeymoon trip very seriously. After all, there was rarely any private space between them. From the very beginning, Yo-Yo and Xiaochen were sandwiched between them. It wasn't that he found them annoying, but there were times when he didn't even have the chance to enjoy their time together. Therefore, he wanted to take advantage of this honeymoon trip to enjoy the world of the two of them. Yoon Shusha buried her face in his chest and asked quietly, "If I go for a month, what about the company?" She raised her head and looked at him. "The company is so busy now. If you don't come back for a month, the board of directors will be in chaos, right? Don't worry about them." Mu Yaja continued, I've already taken care of the company's affairs in advance. When I'm not around, Jiangshan and Jinyu will take care of it. As for you, be good and come with me on our honeymoon trip. Don't worry so much. Yun Shusha muttered, I'm just afraid that the board of directors will talk about me behind your back and confuse you. As a CEO who loves his job, you won't care about the company and only care about me every day. Why aren't you? Chapter 3258. You. Yun Shusha chuckled and glared at him. Suddenly, she smiled coquettishly and hugged his waist, leaning on his chest. That's great. It's rare to be able to enjoy some alone time with no worries and no need to worry about being disturbed by others. That's great. Mu Yaja smiled and pinched her nose affectionately. I promised you that I'll give you the best. She smiled sweetly and rested her head on his arm domineeringly, falling asleep quietly. The next morning, a certain man woke her up in a special way. He coaxed her to get out of bed, washed up, and set off with her. Their luggage was packed early in the morning, and the plane was a private jet. The weather was perfect. When they set off, the sky was clear and boundless. Sitting in the plane, looking out the window, the sky was clear and blue through the snow-white clouds. It was only when the plane landed at the airport and arrived at the destination that she found out where the first stop of her honeymoon trip was. She transferred to a helicopter until a beautiful pink beach came into view. She was shocked and subconsciously blurted out, Hubble Island? You know about it? Of course. Yun Shusha was thrilled. She hugged his arm and said in surprise, How did you know that I've always dreamed of coming here for a vacation? Hubble Island was the most famous resort. On the island, there was a beach that was 3 miles long. The water was clear and the sand was soft. Along the beach, there were 25 colorful villas that formed a luxurious resort. The villas were a combination of Monaco, Balinese, and many other styles. It was also the best diving resort. Pink was the most romantic color for young girls. However, it was often difficult to associate pink with the beach. However, in the Bahamas, like a paradise, there was a beautiful pink beach hidden away. The Bahamas was made up of more than 700 coral islands. Therefore, the surface of the islands was covered with a layer of coral powder and mud. Looking from afar, it was a sea of pink and bright colors, especially at dusk. Against the backdrop of the beach, the sunset scenery was like a dream, like a paradise on earth. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. When they arrived, it was almost dusk. Looking from afar, the beach, the sea, and the sky seemed to gradually change color, from pink to blue, and from blue to pink. The beach reflected the sea, and the sea reflected the sky. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where the end was and where the horizon was. Looking down from the helicopter, one could see the shallow seawater with waves constantly sweeping onto the beach. Even the seawater seemed to be dyed pink. It was especially beautiful and dazzling. Mu Yaja had the entire island under his control, so he didn't have to worry about being disturbed by anyone. Now, this place belonged to them. I'm starting to regret it. Yun Shusha muttered, Why didn't we think of this when we took our wedding photos? If you want to film it, you can film it now. Even if she doesn't wear a wedding dress, she will still be very beautiful. Yun Shusha smiled. Yes, that's good too. It'll be a souvenir. But, did you bring a photographer? Of course I did. Mu Yaja smiled mysteriously. Even if it's a honeymoon, we have to make memories. This man was so considerate. He even brought a photographer with him. She was touched by his thoughtfulness. She hugged him and looked at the sea until the land slowly approached. That breathtaking beauty was also getting closer. Chapter 3259. When they landed on the island, Mu Yaja held Yun Shusha's hand as they got off the helicopter. The local crew had been waiting for them at the helipad for a long time. He quickly came up to them, leading a white horse. Mu Yaja walked up and exchanged a few words with him. Suddenly, he turned around and asked, Madam, shall we go to the beach to enjoy the sea breeze? Now? Yeah. There's still some time before dinner. Why don't we go to the beach to enjoy the scenery? Haven't you always wanted to see the pink beach? Mu Yaja looked at the sky again. The scenery is the best now. It won't be too hot. Sure. Yoon Shusha took another look at the white horse and asked curiously, do you want to ride a horse? Yeah. Yoon Shusha was a little nervous. She immediately said, I've never learned how to ride a horse. Won't I fall? I will. He had learned how to ride a horse since he was young. Although he wasn't proficient in it, he was very familiar with riding a horse. The crew walked up and wanted to help her onto the horse, but Muyaja stopped him. How could this petty man bear to see his lovely wife being touched by other people? Even if he had to help her onto the horse, he had to do it himself. Yoon Shusha couldn't do anything about him. She looked at the local crew who was smiling uneasily and returned a smile. When Muyaja saw this, he was slightly displeased. In the future, you're not allowed to smile at other men. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hubby, do you have to do this? Of course. He didn't allow her to explain. He walked over and helped her onto the horse. When she was seated properly, he held the saddle and got onto the horse. He sat behind her and hugged her in his arms. Yoon Shusha's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but recall that when she was filming Lethal Beauty, there were also scenes where she had to ride a horse. But most of the actors these days were noble. Even if she volunteered to learn how to ride a horse, it was easy for her to fall down. So, the film crew didn't dare to neglect her. As a result, most of the scenes were shot while the horse was still. What was still fresh in people's minds was a scene in which she rode a horse and rushed to the imperial city at lightning speed. She held the reins in one hand and the whip in the other as she galloped all the way. But in reality, during the filming, the horse was stationary. Her body was moving up and down, pretending to be at the very least. As for the scenery along the way, it was all done with post-production special effects with a green screen around her. She was still a little worried that it would seem a little out of place, but the post-production special effects were quite impressive. The feeling it created was exactly the same as riding a horse in real life. However, even though he had ridden a horse, the horse did not move. When he first sat on it, he felt that the saddle was a little hard. Muyaja held the reins, his slender legs clamped down on the horse's belly, and the white horse began to move slowly. The horse had undergone proper training and Muyaja knew how to command it. Hence, the horse was very obedient under his control. It's so obedient, so obedient. Yoon Shusha was a little surprised. So this was what riding a horse really looked like. For a moment, she was eager to give it a try. Is it very difficult to learn how to ride a horse? It's not difficult. Then I want to learn too. Muyaja saw her expectant face and his lips curved into a smile. I'll teach you tomorrow. Really? She had thought that a certain man was worried that she would fall and forbid her from learning. Chapter 3260. Muyaja and Yoon Shusha went abroad for their honeymoon. On the other hand, after Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shun were done with the wedding ceremony, Gong Jie suggested to Yo-Yo that since Yuyaro was being taken care of, he planned to make a trip back to the Gong family. Yo-Yo was silent for a long time. Then, he suddenly said, Uncle, can I go back to the Gong family with you? You? Yes. Yo-Yo smiled and said calmly, the last time I met Grandpa at the wedding, I was his grandson. This time, I'm going back to the Gong family as a core member of the Hurricane Group. Gong Jie was shocked. Father didn't realize your identity the last time. That's because Uncle has protected my identity well. Yo-Yo smiled elegantly. But I'm worried that Grandpa won't be able to let go of his hatred and won't tolerate Daddy. I'm afraid that he'll use underhanded means to deal with Daddy. When that time comes, the situation won't be too awkward. So, you want to go back personally to persuade him? Gong Jie smiled. It's useless. Your grandfather is a very stubborn man. Once he's made a decision, he won't change it. But he hasn't made any decision yet, has he? Yo-Yo asked. If he had made a decision, he would have dealt with Daddy long ago. Gong Jie frowned. Yo-Yo's identity in the Hurricane Group had always been a mystery. Previously, he had made a name for himself with a blueprint. The core members of the Deva Eye project had accidentally discovered that the blueprint, which was originally used to make toys, was so precise that it could be used in the development of weapons. What was even more shocking was that he had broken into the Hurricane Group's dark web. The dark web, as the name suggested, was a black market on the internet. This world was covered by the internet. On the surface, the online media had a wide range of coverage. In fact, there was also the dark web. From small gun deals to major ones like human trafficking and murdering people, there were all kinds of strange things that could be done. As for the dark web, it was also known as the deep web. As the name implied, it was a deep web that was not accessible to the general public. Usually, the Tiebar, Weibo, and major media websites that people visited were all superficial networks. The deep web was a web page that could not be searched by regular search engines. The IP address was well hidden. If the internet world was described as an iceberg, then the web pages that people usually touched were only the tip of the iceberg. The remaining 90% were hidden in the deep sea. Most people would never be able to touch them in their lifetime. The number of domain names on the dark web was more than 1,000 times more than the surface web. The first level was the shallowest and could be accessed through a specific browser. The content was some pornography and other unknown content. The second level was not so easy to enter. It could only be entered through a specific invitation method. There were all kinds of evil forces and terrorist organizations. Very few people had ever explored the third floor. It was said that it hid some classified documents that could not be exposed to the light of day. Yo-Yo found out about the existence of the dark web in this world by chance. He entered a string of domain names. Coincidentally, the domain name was a human trafficking dark web. On the web, there were pictures of different races and the price of different organs. Chapter 3261. Yo-Yo had never thought that there was such a dark side to the world. It was filled with so many heinous transactions. Hence, he used his technology to hack into other dark websites. Only then did he realize that such dark websites were numerous. One of the dark websites was a social network that specialized in selling women. On the web page, there were many pictures of women being tied up and raped. He even found out that there was an underground club in another dark website. This club kidnapped the victims and allowed the rich and powerful to pay for their entertainment. In a certain market, such transactions were legal. However, such an illegal website had never been shown to the world. Some of the victims were willing. Because their families were poor, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to save their families from starvation. Some of the victims were kidnapped and taken away. Their photos were published on the web and the employer would quote a price. The highest bidder would get it. The organization would then send people to kidnap the victims for their entertainment. When Yo-Yo saw such a dark side of the world, he was terrified. At the same time, he thought, I can't let my mommy be in such danger. Everyone had a sense of danger. Yo-Yo's sense of danger was especially strong. He swore that he would make himself stronger. That was until he accidentally hacked into the Hurricane Group's dark website. He intercepted a confidential document sent by a few high-ranking members of the Hurricane Group. When he opened the document, he saw a blueprint. This blueprint was the design of the parts used by the Hurricane Group to develop the Heaven's Eye project. There were thousands of such parts on the web. The Hurricane Group wanted to set up a heaven's net around the world. However, such a heaven's net was only the tip of the iceberg. Yo-Yo was interested in this blueprint. In his opinion, if this blueprint was redesigned, it might be able to be used to make toys. Hence, what happened next happened. The first to discover that the dark website of the Hurricane Group had been hacked was Gong Jie. He suspected that it was the work of a top hacker. The confidential blueprint was also stolen and disappeared. However, a few days later, the redesigned blueprint was uploaded to the dark web. Gong Jie realized that the blueprint was so precise that it made his hair stand on end. The altered data came from an IP address. Following this IP address, Hurricane also hacked into Yo-Yo's computer. However, he didn't find any useful information. When Yo-Yo found out that her network had been hacked by Hurricane, she started fighting with a few of Hurricane's top hackers. When Gong Jie took this drawing to the headquarters of Sky Eye, several designers were shocked and thought that the person who designed this drawing was definitely a genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. Therefore, the Hurricane Group extended an olive branch to him, but they did not expect that such a blueprint would come from a 6-year-old child. When Gong Shaoying found out about this, he still thought it was a fantasy. As the world's #1 firearms group, the Hurricane Group had seen all kinds of situations, but they had never seen such a young but powerful child. Such a blueprint was too precise. Even with Laji's advanced manufacturing technology, it was impossible to create such a toy. When Yo-Yo first joined the Hurricane Group, she was not a core member.